Hello, welcome to another Symbolic Studies live stream. I hope you guys are doing well today. We have an interesting presentation to get around to here. We're going to be talking about the Hierophant, which is the fifth card of the Major Arcana. And I have such a huge soft spot for Taurus. Every single year, it really lures me in. And just bull symbolism in general, the nature of it is extraordinarily deep, and there are so many tangents that I've gone down over the years with bull symbolism that it's incredible to me, all of the layered sort of things that I've picked up, over the last 3-4 years regarding the bull, regarding the cow, and the mythology associated with the cow. Just continues to blow my mind. It's like one of these things where it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving in a way, and it connects so many different religions together. The nature of the bull and the constellation of Taurus too has been, absolutely something that has just meant a lot to me over the years. I've even given a bull presentation in person before as well, so it's no surprise that the Hierophant card speaks to me and that it lured me in this year. So I just had to do a presentation on the Hierophant and everything that it encodes. So I'm stoked to be here. If you're here live, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if you're catching this after the fact, that is awesome as well. And yeah, before we get into the actual cards, let's go over a few slides. First off, if you want to support the channel, please do so by liking or subscribing. If you're so inclined, you can leave me a super chat. That would be awesome. And also just want to say thank you so much to my patron members, including everyone that you see here. We are 22 strong. Much love, much respect. So because this number is so low at the moment, I just want to give everyone a shout out who's a patron. So Amy, Troy, Amanda, Chance, Abby, Nicholas, Yakov, Monica, Nomad, Sarah, Julia, LS, Judy, Barbara, Adrian, Christina, Eloise, Mia, Kurt, Lockstep 2020, Claire, and Miri, and Hank. Thank you guys so much. My goal ultimately is to have so many patrons that I can't name you all. But since I can, I'm going to do so. And if you want to support via Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/symbolicstudies. All right. Well, with some of that stuff said, let's get to the first card here. And if this is the first time you guys are checking out a stream where I'm going over a specific tarot card, what I do is I literally get all of my cards that I have. I scan them all. I go through all of my decks. I pull out the specific card that we're going to be talking about. I scan all of them, and then I present them in order from newest to oldest. So this is the Golden Art Nouveau as an example from 2019. And I go through all of the cards, and we end up at some of the earliest tarot cards known. And so I have a few decks from the 15th century, and it's a really cool thing to do because you just see how the symbolism has changed over, the ages, how the symbolism has stayed the same largely as well. And so you just start picking up the similarities and differences between the decks over time. And so to me, I get a lot out of that. I was doing that before I even gave presentations on it. I found it to be a really worthwhile study, and I feel like I picked up a lot of information just by doing this. And generally what I was doing is picking out the cards that correspond with the signs. So we're obviously in Taurus season right now. The Hierophant is the card that corresponds with Taurus season. And so it makes all the sense in the world to study this card. And as we will talk about, it is so fascinating, the similarities between the Taurus constellation and this card. And I'll just say it right now. One of the big keywords is bridge. And that is what This card, I think, ultimately represents in so many ways. I think the bull is also a bridge. And so you'll be hearing me talk about bridge symbolism because even right now, we're just looking at this card, right? As I'm kind of setting things up here. But this is clearly based off of the Pope. And the official title for the Pope is Pontifex Maximus. And essentially, according to my research, that just means a bridge builder. And he is the bridge between the people and the heavens, between the people and God, if you will. So he is a spiritual mediator. And so the bull, in many ways, I think also symbolically acts as a bridge. So before we get into it, I'm going to hide my camera, and I'm just so that you can see the card full screen. And also just wanted to let you know that I am not checking the chat throughout the presentation, but I will check the chat afterwards, and then I'll hang for a few minutes with you guys, see what's going on. But yeah, with that said, let's get into this first card here. All right, so there you can see it in all of its glory. This deck is gorgeous. I love it because it's essentially an updated Rider-Waite deck, but a lot of the core symbolism remains intact. There's a lot of gold foil in this deck, so you can see right above the Pope, it kind of looks like, you know, this pattern. It kind of looks like a dark brown pattern, and you know, with those gold lines and stuff, that's actually gold foil. But when you scan it, that's what it looks like, right? And so you can see here a traditional rendition of this card, of the Hierophant, of the keeper of the sacred doctrines, right? And so generally, you're going to see the Hierophant, he's throned, he is seated, and it's not uncommon to see him being flanked or by these two pillars. There's generally these two pillars on either side of him. He is making that hand gesture there, which is known as the hand of benediction. Most of the time, it is his right hand. It's a gesture implying, you know, a blessing, right? And so you can also link this with other mudras. And I've seen other people kind of point out the potential planetary correspondence with this hand gesture. So you're going to see this hand gesture like so many different times throughout this presentation. And as the presentation moves along here, we will unpack it accordingly. You can also see that papal cross that he's holding there, right, with the 3 cross arms. So this cross is something that we're going to see repeated multiple times as well. Similarly, we're going to see that papal tiara or crown that he's holding, or that he's wearing rather. And there's generally 3 tiers to this crown as well. I think it's also worth noting, just within the crown itself, you see those little embellishments there. They kind of look like crosses. They kind of look like the fleur-de-lis. The fleur-de-lis is something too that you will see kind of baked into a lot of these cards. At least that's what I've noticed. It's also interesting to note too that on that crown you have that red dot right above his forehead. You know, this kind of reminds me of the bindi, right? And so it looks like it's supposed to highlight his third eye, or the pineal gland. You'll also notice that there's 2 figures down below, and that is something that is very much part of the tradition of this card, is having 2 of his acolytes or 2 of his followers underneath him. Sometimes you can only just see the back of their heads. And there's some really interesting details that we'll pick up through this presentation of these figures, you know, doing different things, holding different things, themselves acknowledging different aspects of the card. And actually, there's some really sinister cards that I have too that show that these figures aren't necessarily to be trusted, which I think is fascinating. And then you can see those 2 crossed keys right down below. And it almost looks like, in this card at least, that one of the figures looks like he's trying to grab one, or looks like he's trying to touch one, right? The figure on the right looks like he's trying to touch it with his left hand, or looks like he's trying to get close to it. And then the figure on the left looks like he's actually praying to it. these keys are very interesting. I've made videos kind of expanding upon what these keys could potentially represent. And of course, they're symbolic keys, but I think that there might be a literal correspondence as well. Symbolically, what I see from these keys is that they could be the gates of heaven and hell. They could also be symbolic keys representing the knowledge that the Hierophant is privy to. And so this is a big aspect to this card, is that the Hierophant is aware of certain things that his followers are not aware of. And this is a thread that I think is really, really intriguing. This idea that the Hierophant is aware of secrets that he's not allowed to divulge. And there have been authors who have written that it appears as though he's aware of secrets, and that he's even kind of laughing at the fact that he knows something that the people don't know. So Crowley actually wrote that sometimes the Hierophant looks like he has a smirk on his face, which I think is really, really funny. And we will look at that card, obviously, moving forward. The number 5 is so it's just blowing my mind right now. I'm inadvertently learning a lot about the number 5, the pentacle, the pentagram, the sacred geometry components of the number 5 and the pentagram, how that relates to the golden mean, the different groups that revered the pentacle, the fact that the pentacle or the pentagram is what is seen on the symbols that represent Earth. So, within the tarot, we have the discs or the coins or the pentacles. You're going to see this 5-pointed star on those coins. And I just think it's really interesting that this is the symbol that represents Earth. It's so appropriate. The main thing about 5 that I'm picking up right now is the fact that it really is a transcendental number. And it appears to me like the number 5 really is a number that bridges the gap between the material and immaterial, or the material world and the non-physical world. So between matter and spirit, I think is where you can find the 5. And so if we're using a base 10 system, the 5 is in the middle of that sequence between 1 and 10. And so it is in between the higher and the lower. And so that is what this card represents, that this figure is also between the higher and the lower, right? And so the number 5 really is this fascinating number that I'm learning a lot about right now. And like I said, inadvertently, I didn't know that I was going to be learning a lot about it, but it's so appropriate for Taurus season, given the fact that this card corresponds with Taurus, and also given the fact that Taurus season, the majority of Taurus occurs during the 5th month of the year. Also, Taurus is ruled by Venus, and Venus in the night sky creates a 5-petaled flower over the course of 8 years. And so it's often called the Venus rose or the Venus pentagram. And so for all of those reasons and more, the 5 is a really, really appropriate number to talk about during Taurus season. And it makes all of the sense in the world that the card that corresponds with Taurus is the 5th card of the major arcana. So those are a few of the things I wanted to run through regarding this card specifically. But let's move forward to the next card. This is the Ethereal Visions card from 2018. And I include this deck because I love it. Like I said, all of these decks are in my personal collection, but everything here is pretty simple. Everything's fairly simple, fairly straightforward as far as I'm concerned. I'm not seeing too many big decodes here, but you can see that there is this crown that is 3-tiered in nature, just like the papal crown. He is making that gesture that implies a blessing with his right hand. And if I didn't say this already, but it is kind of customary to see this gesture be done with the right hand, although we will see other cards that are, kind of flipped and they're using the left hand. He has that papal cross. That papal cross, by the way, with the three cross arms, it's implied that this is a gesture nodding toward the Trinity, the Trinity of the church, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit. I've also read that this cross, the papal cross, is actually encoding a ladder, as in Jacob's ladder or the ladder to heaven. In other words, the stairway to heaven. And that it's another implication saying that this figure is a mediator between what's happening on earth and what's happening in the heavens, that he is able to go from the below to the above, and that he has a relationship with the above and the below. And so to me, when I see this now, I do see this ladder like symbolism, which to me also, including with these wings here coming out from his head, to me this is a very mercurial concept. This idea of being able to travel the bridge between the above and the below. Mercury is known as a psychopomp. He's the guide of souls. And it makes sense that this figure here, that there would be this psychopomp aspect to him as well. And I just have to say, I tend to see Mercury all over the place. There's a reason why so many different groups revere Mercury, and there's a reason why Mercury is such a shapeshifter. You can find him everywhere. So I feel like every single sign I'm noticing mercurial symbolism kind of baked into it. All you have to do too, by the way, is just look at the glyph of Taurus and add a cross underneath it, and you have the symbol for Mercury, right? Or rather, you have the symbol for Mercury and you remove the cross underneath, and then you have the symbol or the glyph for Taurus. So there is a relationship between Taurus and Mercury, and I think that the glyphs for both of them share that similarity, which I think is interesting. Also, his eyes are closed, which is interesting. It means that he is going within. And eye symbolism does play a part in this card as well, especially in the Crowley deck. It's kind of fascinating that there are a number of masks representing the fixed signs, and none of them have eyes as well. And so eye symbolism, I think, is kind of appropriate to talk about almost all the time. But we'll pick up a few sort of interesting details along the way here. You can also see those roses, too, in that frame that's encompassing him on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And, roses oftentimes are five-petaled in nature. It's not uncommon to see roses when they're illustrated graphically to have five petals. And as I just mentioned, Venus has a correspondence with the number 5. And so when you see a 5-pointed star, that is a reference, in my opinion, in so many different ways to Venus, which is also known as the morning star and the evening star. And there's all this esoteric stuff, associating Venus with Lucifer and things like that as well. And so obviously that's not the purpose of this presentation, but that certainly is a thread that you can follow. But those roses just remind me of the nature of the 5, the nature of the rose in general, how it oftentimes corresponds with the Virgin Mary or Mother Mary. And that is something, too, that kind of comes up a few different times as well, is this symbol that relates to the Virgin and even virgin birth as well. So I've said this before, but the Virgin Mary, she was given a flower, which was the catalyst to give or have a virgin birth. So even flower symbolism in general, there's this virgin birth sort of connection that's tied to it, which I've gotten into in other videos. But we will see more roses later on in the presentation for sure. So moving forward here, we have a deck called Pagan Otherworlds, and this is from 2016. And the first thing that I'm picking up with this deck, right, is, well, first off, the nature of this deck, the theme of the deck is, as the name implies, it's oriented with paganism in mind. And you can see here what would be referred to, or what looks like, a priest, right? And that's what the Hierophant is. He's a high priest, and so he's wearing these pelts. He has more of a rustic, natural crown. But you even see too within this crown that they've retained this three-tiered sort of nature with it. He's also making a hand gesture that implies some sort of blessing as well. Most of the time, you're going to see it with two fingers being pointed up and then two fingers being suppressed with that thumb. Here you can see all of his fingers are out there. To me, I just think of the number 5. Once again, he's showing all of his fingers. He's showing his hand that he has nothing to hide, right? He has that classic beard that a lot of Hierophants have. And the scepter that he's holding here is pretty interesting because to me, it just reminds me of Algi's, which is a rune, right? A Norse rune. And Algi's generally corresponds with the letter Z or the X. And so its correspondence with the X relates it to the cross. And so even I made a post about this recently, but the T and the X have a relationship together. And there is a line of thinking that the T derived from a Phoenician X, or what was known as a Ta or Tau, right? So there is a very clear connection, in my opinion, to T's and X's and the Tau cross, right? And so he doesn't have a cross, but he has this shape here with this scepter, which to me, like I said, looks a lot like Algi's. And so I think that this is kind of being implied, this Algi's connotation, this Algi's rune. There aren't two pillars behind him, but you see these two sets of rocks. And so the Hierophant being between these two pillars, by the way, it really implies that the Hierophant is the middle way, that he is representing the middle path or the path forward. And so if you're going to talk about the symbolism through the lens of the Kabbalistic tree of life, as an example, the Kabbalistic tree of life generally has these 3 pillars: a pillar on the left, a pillar on the right, and a pillar right there in the middle. And that middle pillar represents the middle way. And so my interpretation of this is that the middle pillar represents the world axis, which is the bridge between the different planes above and the different planes below. This is the bridge that the psychopomp Mercury uses to travel to the heavens, right? Or to the different spheres of reality, you can say. And so there is that really strong central pillar with his staff. And to me, it just reminds me of the trident as well. And so notice that the middle part of the trident is just an extension of the staff. And then you have the 2 other points on the side of it, right? And so this middle pillar, this central staff, is the middle way, which is also known as the middle road. And to me, this is just the path to transcendence. This is the path to the great beyond. So it's symbolic of the path to the heavens, in my opinion. And so it also encodes the Trinity as well, right? So you've got those 3 different points. And once again, obviously with the church, the Trinity is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But this is a lovely deck, by the way. So if you've never checked it out, I really appreciate a lot of the things that they're doing here. And I think that the artwork is pretty cool. So there you go. Pagan Otherworlds from 2016. And now we have a deck from 2015. So this is the Tarot of the Holy Light. And this deck is bonkers. I mean, there is so much going on with this deck, and with every single card, I almost feel like whenever it comes around, I feel like I need to do more research on every single individual card that I've attempted to talk about, because you just know that it's completely layered with all sorts of amazing symbolism that honestly might be going right over my head. The nature of this deck is very interesting, actually. So it's created by a local artist to the Pacific Northwest. And what she has done is she has in whatever way. I'm not sure how exactly she does it, but she has a lot of resources at her disposal. She has a lot of alchemical artwork in her library or in her archive, and she actually pulls together different elements from these different alchemical books and illustrations, and she brings them all together to create these different cards. And so what you see here is actually just a collage. So it's a collage of different artwork from the alchemical world. And so you can see above, the figure there is clearly supposed to be symbolic of the Hierophant. I think it's interesting that it appears as though he is sitting on that red orb or that red sphere. This idea of being throned or sitting in general, I feel like I have a new appreciation about what it all represents. But the fact that he is in this position is clearly very obvious. I think that the five limbs corresponding with that five, right, are even more emphasized when you see him this way. And so obviously too, he's not wearing, a gown or anything like that. So you can just really see him exposed. So he looks vulnerable. He has that papal tiara, right? He has that papal crown. It's that three tiers that you will see, that classic sort of silhouette that we're going to see throughout the series here. And just behind that crown are those solar rays, that sun, right? Or is it? That's always something that I'm kind of skeptical about now, because you have that sun right there on the left-hand side too, right? And so to me, it just makes me wonder, is this the sun? Is it something else? I've seen it in a lot of artwork that is Freemasonic in nature. The fact that they will show a sun and then they will show a moon, but then right behind a central pillar or gateway or whatever, there will be this other thing. And sometimes it is the pole star. I'm not saying that's exactly what this is, but the possibility to me is there, because pole star symbolism very much relates to this world axis or this cosmic axis, which is the connection between the above and below. And as soon as we get to a card that has the Hebrew letter correspondence, I'll get into this a little bit more, because the Hebrew letter that corresponds with this card speaks to this greatly. It's very, very interesting. And so he's in this sphere above what looks like another sun, right? So just below, you can see that little illustration of a sun that has the face in it. And then these two animals that are next to the sun that look like they're at odds with the sun. At first, when I glanced at this, the upper body to me kind of looks like a bear. It looks like two bears in a way, but they also kind of look like lions as well. And their tails definitely imply that it's a lion. But there is something going on there. I wonder if this is a hybrid creature, a chimera of some sort, or some other amalgamation of animals. So if you guys have an opinion about what those animals are, I would love to know. But what I'm seeing, I'm picking up bear vibes, especially with the that head there, and then towards the bottom of its body, I definitely get more of a lion. And there's a lot of older alchemical works of art where you are actually seeing a lion eating the sun as well. And so each of those figures, whatever they are, they each have 3 stars within them. So there's this implied 7th star. It's almost like they each have 3 stars. And then that sun, it would be a 7th star. If that's the case, it just reminds me of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the Great Bear and Little Bear, which each have 7 stars apiece. So I'm just spitballing, but it makes me want to learn more about this card. And I know there's an associated book as well that really gets into this deck. And I actually tried to order it, and what came in the mail was another book by the deck's creator. And so I wish I had that around, because I would look up to see what her intention was behind all of this. But just below that, you're going to see these 4 spheres on the sides, 2 on the left and then 2 on the right. To me, what I'm picking up from this is that these represent the 4 elements. And so the one on the left with the sun, I think represents air. And then right underneath, you can see a salamander, which oftentimes corresponds with fire, that this is an elemental creature that represents fire. So again, air above, right underneath fire. And then the sphere on the right above, that is symbolic of earth. It's showing earth. And then right underneath that, I believe that is supposed to be a body of water, an ocean or a lake. So I think those are the 4 elements: air, fire, earth, and water. And then I guess what I would say then is that upper sphere is the 5th element. This is the 5th card of the major arcana. And so when you're dealing with the number 5, you're also dealing with the 5 elements: air, fire, earth, water, and spirit. That the Hierophant himself is in the sphere of spirits. That's kind of what I gather. But again, I'm open to other interpretations, and I would not be surprised, if there's multiple layers of symbolism going on here. So instead of the 2 classic pillars on the left and the right, you see these 2 trees, but it still implies that this Hierophant represents the middle way. And then kind of front and center in between the elemental spheres, you can see 2 figures. One represents the sun, the other represents what looks like lunar energy, I would assume. So the masculine and the feminine. This reminds me of concepts related to Mercury, concepts related to the divine androgyne, and both of them are also seated. So all of the figures here are kind of seated, which again, I will be getting into in other cards. So the other thing that I wanted to mention about this card is the fact that she corresponds the Hierophant not with Taurus, but with Aries. And so down below on the lower left-hand side of the full card, you'll see just to the right of the Hierophant title, you're going to see the glyph for Aries. And so I think this is an interesting correspondence for a few reasons. Traditionally, at least right now in this era, most people say that the beginning of the astrological year is Aries. So Aries brings in spring. It transitions us from winter. But if you believe in precession, the precession of the equinoxes, at one point, Taurus was the first sign of spring. And so it's possible that a lot of the Taurus and bull symbolism and cow symbolism that I really got into a handful of years ago, the reason why it's so potent and one of the reasons why it's so powerful is because Taurus at one point may have been the first sign of spring. And so this is a whole debate, by the way, whether precession occurs or doesn't occur. And I just have to say, I haven't done my due diligence to have a very strong opinion one way or the other. Where I'm kind of at with it is that I'm more so open to each possibility. And I think it's interesting that these possibilities are out there. And I think there's multiple interesting conversations to have with all of that. But if precession does occur, that also means that the pole star has changed over time. Right now it's Polaris, but it would have been other stars, over the ages. If precession doesn't occur, it means that the pole star has always been the same, and that the heavens have, aside from the wandering stars, have been the same relatively over, who knows, since the beginning of time. I don't know. So anyway, so those are all just, things to consider, food for thought more than anything else. But once again, this is the Tarot of the Holy Light from 2015. And moving forward, we have the Night Sun Tarot from 2014. And this deck is wild. I've shown a few cards as I've been doing these presentations, and there is a sort of, not a sinister sort of outlook, but let's just say this deck is dark. This deck can get very, very dark. And I would say that there's a few things in here, while it's not overt violence or bloodshed or anything like that. The symbolism to me is very dark, but very, very interesting. So, the main thing that I'm referring to, by the way, is the fact that one of the followers here has a knife behind his back. And I don't think he's afraid to use it. So, there's this idea in filmmaking, by the way, where if you show a gun at some point, if you show a gun in a scene, that someone should pull its trigger by the end of the film. And so just by showing the gun, you're alluding to that gun going off and potentially then obviously someone getting shot. The same thing is going on here. By showing that knife, you're implying that he is going to stab that Hierophant, stab the Pope, right? And so a lot of the symbolism is fairly straightforward and traditional for what it is. It's interesting to see behind the Pope that there are these three pillars. So it's connecting the Pope with that central pillar, that third pillar, or as I've been saying, potentially the first pillar. And so they're just showing you that he is in line with this middle way or middle path, which once again I correspond with the cosmic axis or the world axis, the symbolic bridge from the North Pole to the North Star, the pole star, right? And then on his throne or chair, you can see that there are those two bulls' heads, right next to him. He's also holding that papal cross with the three arms going across it. He's making the mudra, right, of the papal blessing, the hand of benediction. And then the final thing here to me that's really intriguing is that he is basically, he has these acolytes in front of him. We got the one guy with the knife behind him, but then you have the other figure and he's presenting two triangles to him. One triangle is pointed up and one triangle is pointed down. This is an as above, so below reference, right? This is a reference to the bridge that the Pope represents, the bridge between the above and the below. And the whole thing behind this is that the Pope has an understanding of this bridge. He has an understanding of the heavens, and I would say as well as the underworld, the above world, the heavens, and the underworld. And so he's able to communicate with the other side. He's in touch with the other side. He's in touch with entities or deities or spirits or with God, if you want to put it that way, that his followers are not in touch with. So he is acting as a mediator. He is acting as a in between, between these different bodies, right, and these different planes. And so to me, these two triangles represent the above. It represents the below. But I also am getting this sort of geometric symbolism from it as well. That to me, it's implying geometry, right? Even looking at the Freemasonic symbol, the classic glyph of Freemasonry, you have the square and then you have the compass. The square is pointing downward. The compass is pointing upward. They're overlaid with each other. And then you've got that G right in the middle. And so some people have said or made the claim that that G represents geometry or it represents God. And so to me, one of the secrets that the Hierophant might possess is literally the secrets behind geometry. So sacred geometry, right? Where does the Pope work? Where does he do his magic? Within the church, within cathedrals, right? We all know that cathedrals are encoded with amazing symbolism, amazing mathematics, right? That really amplify his message and really charge the various rituals and things like that that are happening within the confines of that building. So even the cathedral itself or the buildings that these popes occupy, they themselves also are symbolic bridges between the above and the below. And one of the things I'm reading about right now is this idea that God is a mathematician. And I believe one of the words is geometer, that God is a geometer, that he's into math, that he respects math, he reveres math. It's encoded in everything. So whether you're talking and that can be broken down numerologically, literally our words and literally the letters that make up our words, um, or you're talking about the geometry of nature, the sacred geometry of nature. And when you're looking into nature symbolism and you're looking into the mathematics of nature, you start getting into the golden spiral, right? The Fibonacci sequence and all these other things. All of this stuff relates back to the number 5 in so many incredible ways. And so to me, that's just kind of perhaps one of the implications here as well. But if you notice too, he's holding a triangle going above and a triangle going below, pointed upward, pointed downward. And then right behind the Pope, you see a 6-pointed star. The 6-pointed star, or the Star of David, right? I mean, it's just an upward triangle and a downward triangle fused on top of each other. And then right above that symbol, you see another 6-pointed star, another Star of David, right? And so to me, this encodes the cube, which basically is symbolic of space in general. The fact that there's 4 directions and then a above and a below, right? The cube relates to the Kabbalah as well. The cube relates to the Tree of Life as well. Cube symbolism is freaking fascinating. I actually can't even believe I've never done like a cube breakdown before. A lot of my cube research came before I started a channel, but there is a lot to be said about the cube, including the fact that if you unfold a cube, you're going to get the Latin cross. You're going to get a cross. And so the cube really, it unifies all of the Abrahamic religions. So I'm sure some people who are watching this are aware, but you unfold the cube, you're going to get the cross. If you look at the Star of David, so that's a symbol of Christianity, obviously. You look at the Star of David, and basically the silhouette, if you connect each point, that is the silhouette of a cube, basically a 6-sided cube, and you have 6 sides if you connect the dots. So the cube can actually fit nested within that Star of David shape. And then also in Islam, you have the Kaaba cube. And so this is the cube when Muslims make their pilgrimage in Mecca. And they're going to circle this cube 7 times. And so the cube, like I said, there's a lot to be said about it. I'm barely scratching the surface here, but the cube unites, I would say, the Abrahamic religions in a really, really curious way. So when you see the Star of David, think cube. And when you see the cube, you can think of the cross. And I always, by extension, too, am thinking about that Kaaba cube in Mecca. Right? So also, I mean, look at this Pope. He looks like he's like on death's door. He does not look healthy. He looks like he's sick, and he looks like he's out of it. And so maybe these guys are like thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe it's time for this guy to get out of here. So he's already on his way out. Maybe we can help him out. The last thing as well, I guess I'll say, is that the left hand of the Pope is blue. And so it's not uncommon to see the Hierophant wearing a glove on his left hand or right hand. I think generally it's his left hand, though. So he's usually making that mudra hand gesture with his right hand, and then he has a glove on the other hand. Very, very interesting. It's also maybe perhaps too fine for you guys to see, but he also has crosses on both of his hands, which you're going to see in some of the older decks as well. Last thing, now that I'm noticing it, it's kind of just from a design perspective, the fact that that sword or knife behind that figure on the right, it really connects with that papal cross as well. That the staff of the papal cross, it just completes that line. So it's very, very interesting. It's implying to me that the authority of the Pope, obviously this figure or this person wants to be in that position. He wants to be that leader, right? The leader of the church. But with that comes all sorts of other stuff. With that comes other people wanting your head, wanting your position, and all of that kind of stuff. So in one way, his position of being the Pontifex Maximus, there is blessings and curses that come with that position, I would say. But this goes with a lot of other things too. Nice. So this is the card I used for the thumbnail, and I think it's beautiful. I think it's really, really well done. It's called the Tarot of the Third Millennium from the year 2000. Here you can see the Pope, and his back is facing us. Very, very interesting. There's a few different things to imply with this. There's a few different things that I think we can kind of take away from the fact that he is looking away from us. You know, why would that be the case? Is there something that he's hiding that he doesn't want us to see? Are we actually in a privileged position to be behind him? You know, is this speaking to perhaps the unseen side of the papacy and of this position, of this role that he's fulfilling, that many people have played over the ages? There's certainly more questions, I think, that that come up for me, at least, because we can't see the figure's face. We can't see what he looks like. We can't see if he is young or old. We can't see if he's healthy. We can't see if he's smirking or smiling. You know, we can't see if he's in good health or poor health, like the last card, right? So this figure to us is unknown. And in a way, I think it's, you know, it's beautiful symbolism too, because this role that he's playing, it's just like a character. It's like James Bond or something, right? So there have been a handful of actors that have played James Bond, but James Bond is still the same character, even though multiple actors have played that role. It's the same sort of idea, is that he is occupying, or he has been given a title, but other people have also held that title and have also held that position, right? And so even when this physical Pope dies, this Hierophant dies, there's going to be another high priest to take his place, right? And so in a way, he's just fulfilling the role of this character right now. So it almost doesn't even matter what the face looks like. It almost doesn't even matter what his real name is, what his real history is. The church is going to take care of all of the PR and all of the propaganda, and people are going to worship this guy, and they're going to treat him, you know, like a terrestrial god, like a demigod, regardless, you know, unbeknownst to anyone who this guy actually is in reality, right? And so to me, there implies secrecy. It implies mystery and the mysteries. And this is partly what, obviously, this card is largely all about. He's the keeper of the mysteries and of the sacred doctrines and everything else. And so I love the fact that this artist chose to illustrate the Pope this way. Instead of the two classic pillars behind him, you're going to see it within like the steeples of the church. And then instead of two followers at his feet, you can see that there's two statues right within those steeples on the left-hand side and right-hand side. I mentioned earlier the fleur-de-lis symbol, right? You can kind of see that within the cathedral itself. And then obviously he's using this cathedral, he's using this church as a chair, as a throne itself, which I think is really, really intriguing. And then you have the stained glass window, you know, right there as well, implying kind of what I was saying earlier regarding the sacred geometry aspect of everything. But otherwise, a lot of the symbolism is fairly straightforward. His Pope hat, to me, you know, you can find illustrations where there's a direct connection between the silhouette or the build of that hat and ancient fish gods, and that it's actually a nod towards some of these ancient fish gods that came from the oceans and bestowed wisdom upon humanity. It's also, just have to say, a lot of times these fish gods come from the north, that this is one of the deeper decodes with these figures, is that sometimes they're said to come from the northern sky, and sometimes actually they're said to come literally from Ursa Major itself. So I always have to throw that stuff out there whenever it's appropriate. Um, but you see those two ribbons, right, kind of hanging off of his hat. I think it's intriguing that there's one in front and then also one in the back. So to me, this is also implying too that just like all of us, we all wear masks, right? There's different aspects of us. So I am a son, but I'm also a boyfriend. I'm also a friend. I'm also a client for some people. I'm also an employee, freelancer for some people. So we all wear different faces. Some of you are parents, so you wear that face or that mask as well. And so this is implying to me that there's this front-facing aspect of the papacy, but there's also this hidden aspect as well. There's a lot of things that are kept from us, that are hidden, that are secretive. And also this fits in line with the fact that the Pope knows a lot of things, right? But we're not exactly privileged to know those things. We just know that he's aware. We just know that he is this symbolic bridge builder, right? And that he has done his homework, or else he wouldn't be in this position. And so I kind of like this sort of public versus private aspect with this card, right? He's also holding the classic papal cross, and then he has the glove on his right hand. And so overall, again, this deck is gorgeous. I love it. I think it's very, very interesting. I'm super glad I picked it up. You can actually just buy a major arcana version of this deck, which is what I have. And I love it. I think it's really, really well done. So once again, Tarot of the Third Millennium from the year 2000. And then moving forward here, we have the Jodorowsky deck, which is from 1998. And so Alejandro Jodorowsky is a well-known filmmaker. And what he essentially did was he revised and updated and cleaned up the Marseille deck, which is a really classic deck. So even though this was released in 1998, its roots are much, much older. But a lot of the symbolism that we've gone over are present. So that papal cross, that crown, which also, I don't know if I've said this yet, but the crown too being related to the Trinity, right? Those three tiers of the crown, and then the two pillars behind him once again being the middle way. His one of his hands is gloved, and then the other one is ungloved. You can see it's just exposed. And so this implies what I'm saying too, the public versus private aspect of everything. So yes, on one hand, he's a public figure, but he has a lot of secrets. And so I think this is what the as above, so below symbolism kind of represents too, is this outward facing nature, but then this inward sort of facing nature as well. And so you're getting both with this guy. And he is in between those two things. He is in between the public and the private, right? The inner and the outer, the above and the below. He's in between those two pillars, right? And so those two pillars very much can represent the same thing. So we're dealing with polarity here, basically. So we're dealing with the positive, and then we're dealing with the negative. Each pillar represents one of those things. So classically, one of the pillars is known as Boaz and Jachin, or the other one is Jachin, one is Boaz. One is masculine, the other's feminine, one is light, one is dark, one represents the day side, one represents the night side, projective, receptive. It goes on and on and on, right? And so the Pope represents the idea that he is able to bridge the gap between polarity, between the positive and the negative, between the light and the dark, between the above and the below. And so that's what the middle way represents. And that's also what Mercury represents as well, which is why Mercury is androgynous, right? And why he's a traveler. And so he is going between the spectrum of reality. And in order to do that, you need to be malleable. You need to be sometimes more receptive. Other times you need to be more projective. And so the idea is to really have the capability of going along this spectrum. pretty much, bridging the gap of the spectrum of negative and positive, feminine, masculine, etc. And so I think that's kind of what's being implied here with this hidden hand, so to say, which is a very Masonic thing, right? You guys have probably seen Freemasonic photos or illustrations where somebody has a glove or somebody has their hand within their breast pocket or within their jacket or something like that. And so this is definitely a thing. One hand hidden, the other hand exposed. And also, too, he's not making the biggest gesture towards this, in my opinion, but generally he does have one hand above the other. They're not on the equal sort of plane. One is generally lower, the other one is higher. In many ways, this kind of reminds me of Baphomet, right? And then once again, Mercury, usually classic depictions of Mercury Hermes, he's doing the exact same thing. But there are so many little things in this deck in general, but in this card as well, that Jodorowsky really went to town with. So he has a corresponding book with this deck, and I think there's a lot to appreciate about it, but he gets into so many different things regarding just like these little circles and lines and stuff. And, he really, like, as an example, I'm sure in his book, he talks about what kind of looks like a yin yang sort of symbol, right? You see half of it's white, half of it's blue. It's in between the two figures down below. And you can see that there's this blue line leading towards it. He probably has like a paragraph about what that represents. But just riffing here, it kind of speaks to this polarity, duality sort of angle, feminine, masculine, positive, negative, just like the yin yang symbol. And these two figures represent the same thing as well. So in many ways, these two figures down below have a correspondence with the two pillar symbolism. So that's pretty much most of, I think, what I want to say. The other thing that's coming to mind here is the fact that Taurus corresponds with the throat and the neck. And I was on a show recently with some really, really great decoders over on the Interverse podcast. And we started talking about a lot of throat symbolism and neck symbolism and communication symbolism as well as it relates to Taurus season. And the Hierophant is very much in line with all of this. And so notice that his neck really is layered. It almost looks like he has the cape, and then he has that pin that's pinning the cape over his neck. And then it almost just looks like that cape and pin are just resting over his beard, which looks like it can be thick. And so throat symbolism is something to acknowledge with the Hierophant. And this gets into the idea of language being also a bridge between people, a bridge between you and the gods, between you and the heavens. It's a bridge between you and manifestation and creation as well. And God said, let there be light, right? And so one of the keys here, right, the symbolic keys of the Pope, of that office, those crossed keys, which you can't see here, but I'm sure we'll see it here pretty soon. One of the keys that he might possess is literally the key to language itself, the key to communication. I recently went over the Tower card, and I talked about the Tower of Babel. And the Tower of Babel having a lot of communication symbolism, at least the storyline, having a lot of communication symbolism baked right into it. And so the people of Babylon wanted to create this tower. They were unified. They created it over, I think, like 42 years or 43 years, something along those lines. And then God put a halt to it. And the way he did it was he scrambled all of their languages. So basically, he introduced all of these brand new languages so they couldn't communicate with each other. And so because they couldn't communicate with each other, they could no longer complete this project that required a lot of collective effort and energy. And so communication, once again, it is this bridge. And we're going to get into this too, even more so in Gemini season, because there's a lot to be said with the air signs and communication. And so that's another aspect here, paying attention to the throat and also just acknowledging that communication, language, speaking, and especially esoteric communication. So understanding the deeper nuances of language and of words, and the etymological roots of some of the words that we use every single day, I think could be an aspect of what's being encoded with some of these cards. So moving forward, we have the Tarot of Ceremonial Magic, and this deck is from 1995. This is an interesting deck. It's an esoteric deck, and so it always gives you a different spin than I think a lot of the other decks that at least I have in my collection. The deck's creator is a guy. His name is Lon Milo Duquette, and he is, he's a big thing in the OTO, and he has written a handful of books. He's more of an author than an illustrator, and so I've said this before, but this deck is actually pretty crude. But the symbolism to me is on point, and I think the symbolism always gets me thinking. And like I said, he always presents a different angle or perspective that I personally appreciate. And so this is a very different pope. This is a very different hierophant, or this is a very different high priest. And so, if I'm not mistaken, by the way, this actually might be the deck's creator himself. He may have put himself in the role of the hierophant here, because he used to be kind of chubby. He's a bigger boy, and then I know he lost a lot of weight at some point. And so I think that maybe he was using an old photo of himself. And I think just generally, whenever I see any figure in this deck, it always looks like it has a personality. Doesn't it look like he probably traced photos to get these faces, right? I can see like a personality kind of come through with the figure on the right, and then I can kind of see it with him. And it also makes sense too, knowing how rudimentary his illustration skills are. It would make perfect sense that he wouldn't be able to just conjure up these faces and figures and stuff, that he's probably tracing things. And so that's what it looks like to me, at least. But I think that there's a few things worth discussing here, okay? First off, you don't have the traditional pillars, but you have these trees in the background, and it looks like we're in the desert. And these trees are of the palm family. And palm trees are really, really interesting because, in the Middle East, those were like the trees of life. Those were the world trees, right? And there's also the dates that date palms produce, right? Very, very interesting symbolism with dates. You don't see them here, but palm tree symbolism is very, very deep. There's a lot to say about it. Even the fact that they're called palm trees, it's a reference to the hand. And there are different holidays, holy days, that utilize a palm branch, right? And then there's also Palm Sunday. And palm symbolism is also, I see a lot of it encoded into into the Hermit card as well. But speaking of hands and palms and everything, notice that the figure here, the Hierophant, he's actually concealing one of his hands. So this is, once again, kind of alluding to all the things we've already talked about. This public versus private nature, this front facing sort of side to things, and then this hidden aspect to things. So there's part of him that does not want to be seen and wants to be concealed. So there are secrets. He has secrets, right? I guess as any high priest or hierophant should, the path of, I guess the path of wisdom or the path of knowledge, the esoteric path, the occult path, the path of truth, spiritual truth, the path of enlightenment. It's really not for everybody. It's not for everybody. I don't think it's meant personally to be for everybody. I think that the people who choose this path in a serious sort of way, oftentimes they're alienated by people because they know things that other people simply have never even looked into. They're unaware of the things that you are aware of. And so it can be an isolating sort of path. And by choosing this path, by choosing a path of study and a path where you're choosing to really honor and revere your God, you are going to have secrets. You're just going to simply know things that other people don't know. So most of the people who go to church, right, they live a very simple life. They maybe don't take their own studies very seriously. They're more so interested in going along to get along. They get whatever they want to get out of attending church. And, to them, they're happy just to go to church once a year, 2, 3 times a year, just on specific holidays or holy days, or maybe just once a week. So if you're going to choose this path, right, of religious studies, I guess, you are just going to know things that other people do not know, right? You are going to have an awareness of certain things that other people aren't aware of. And that's why people are going to come to you for advice, and they're going to come to you for your knowledge and your perspective on things. Okay. And so to me, this secrecy sort of aspect, it's not necessarily similar, or it's not necessarily sinister, excuse me. I think that this is just kind of the nature of getting into these things is that you're going to be aware of certain aspects of reality that other people are not. So that's kind of what I take from this. And I'm sure there could be other esoteric angles with all of this as well that I'm not aware of. I think it's really interesting that instead of a church, instead of being throned, there's this tent right behind him. What's going on with this tent? Well, tent symbolism is actually a thing. You can get into the nature of the tent and what the tent represents and the various holidays that require tents, as an example. So I know in Judaism, there's at least one holiday that I'm aware of where you're reenacting, the whole wandering around the desert for a period of time sort of storyline. So you are basically living in a tent and you are communing with God by being in this makeshift structure, basically. And that there's all of these really deep encoded aspects to this tent. There's something about the temporary nature of the tent that's interesting, about being home or being comfortable or being with God basically anywhere, and of living your life out in the wilderness basically. And there's the whole wandering Jew thing as well, right? The wandering Jews, and not really having a home, not really having a place, but wandering the desert because they haven't really planted themselves anywhere. And notice that this tent, by the way, has this central post. And so it's implied that there's a central post within this tent. And that is like the simplest way to make a tent, right? Is to have that central post. It's also known as like a prop. And this prop is holding up the whole entire tent itself. And so even if there's other posts, that central post goes above the other posts pretty much. This post is symbolic of the world axis, believe it or not. And so the world axis, one of the symbols, or one of the things that's tied to the world axis is this idea that it bridges, there's that word again, bridges the gap between the above and the below, but it also separates the above and the below. It's both a connector and a separator. And so that is what the tent pole represents. So it represents the cosmic axis or the cosmic axle, which the heavens revolve around. So when you actually create a tent with that central post, you are creating a microcosm of the whole entire universe. And so that central post is the central pillar. And so you can see on the left-hand side, that central post is right in the middle of the two trees. And so we're seeing more tree of life symbolism, basically, world tree symbolism. So you got the pillar on the left or the tree on the left, and then you got the pillar or tree on the right, and then you got that central pillar right there in the middle, which is the middle way. And there's also this implied inner aspect to the tent as well. This dwelling being a place where you can go inward, right? And so he can go within this tent, and he can do any number of things. So it is, related to vessel symbolism. There's more of this hidden nature sort of aspect with it as well. What is within the tent? What's happening within this tent, right? To me, I don't know if you guys picked this up, and I can't tell. Is the figure on the left supposed to be a man, or is it supposed to be a woman? I think clearly the figure on the right is a woman. The figure on the left, I think, is a little more debatable. Is that a mustache, or is that something else? It's probably a mustache now that I look at it. So to me, if that's the case, if that's a man on the left and a woman on the right, he just reminds me of someone who's marrying a couple, that he's a priest uniting this couple in marriage. And so once again, this bridge between the feminine and the masculine. And so I think potentially there is this wedding ceremony sort of being implied here, right? That's kind of what I pick up a little bit. And so again, food for thought. But also, speaking of this middle pole, this prop, if you will, notice down below you can see the symbol for Taurus, right? The horns of the bull, and then the bull's head, and then to the upper right of that you're going to see a Hebrew letter. This Hebrew letter is Vav, which means nail. And the symbolism behind this letter is really, really fascinating, and it's so perfect. It's so perfect for the Hierophant. It's perfect for the fifth card of the Major Arcana. But nail symbolism, as in like a nail that you use for building things, nailing into wood. The nail binds. It binds things together. And so the same way this prop or pole or the cosmic axis binds together the above and the below. So the same way a bridge binds two places together, it connects two places. So this nail symbol, this Vav symbol, is a connector. And so it's a bridge, basically. And so really, it's just another symbol for the world axis, honestly. And so it is exactly what the Pope represents as well, as being this bridge builder, and so being this connector between the heavens and the people. And so that is what the Vav represents, this nail. And then it's also a pole. It's a post. It's a pillar. It's an obelisk. It's all of these different things. And so whenever you see any kind of structure, especially a building that's tall or something like a tower, basically, which I really got into in my tower card presentation, or the Tower of Babel, right? You're trying to build a bridge to the heavens. That's the implication here, right? But the thing that connects us and the heavens symbolically is literally the vertical line or the phallus, I would say. And so it's all the same symbolism as far as I'm concerned, whether you're talking about the tree, whether you're talking about that prop or post or pole, whether you're talking about the Vav nail, and even the number 5, it's the same thing. It bridges the gap between the physical and metaphysical, between the material world and the spiritual world. That's what the 5 represents. That's what the pentacle represents as well. And so even also too, I just have to say regarding the pentacle or the pentagram, the Greek letter that represents this ratio, this golden ratio, or at the very least has a connection with this golden ratio, which is encoded in the 5-pointed star, is phi, P-H-I, right? I think it's very, very interesting that it's connected to the pentacle and therefore the number 5. So phi and 5 are very much related to each other as well. And sometimes the golden mean, or this golden ratio, it used to be depicted with the tau, the Greek tau. And so you guys know that certain letters can represent mathematical numbers and things like that, like pi, right? 3.14. So tau used to be connected to the golden mean, and I think maybe in some circles it's still used that way. Tau as in Taurus, right? TAU. So there's a number of words and there's a number of things out there that start with TAU, and all of them go back to Taurus somehow. So I just have to throw that out there as well. So how amazing is all of that stuff? I think it's very, very intriguing. Okay. So moving forward, we have another card, and this one is from the Tarot of the Ages. And this is from 1988. And this deck, as you can see, is Egyptian themed. And so I love this deck. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really cool. I've always been into Egyptology. There's a lot more I need to learn about it, but I just have an appreciation for the various symbols and the artwork and things like that. But there you can see a 5-pointed star, obviously symbolic of, a number of things, but encoding that 5, right? This being the 5th card of the major arcana. And then you can see the pharaoh being throned and seated there. And then I think what you're seeing, by the way, so you're seeing a goddess, right, in between his legs. And this is something that you're going to see in the Crowley deck. And specifically in the Crowley deck, it's going to be Isis, right? And so there's this sort of feminine aspect to the Hierophant as well. And I think we're probably going to see more aspects of it actually as we get into some of the older decks. That there's a feminine quality to the Hierophant. And I would say personally, one of the things that I've really gotten into, or one of the conclusions I've come to over the last probably 2 or 3 months, especially after I did my Emperor card presentation. My understanding is this, guys, that when you see a man being, when you see a man throned and he's sitting, this is actually a nod to the feminine. That really the original throned authoritative figure is the queen. And that I think that when you see a king or you see a person, a male in power, and he is sitting in a throne, he is actually mirroring the actions of the queen. And so feminine symbolism is more passive, and don't get it twisted. This is not a bad thing. There's nothing negative about it at all. But feminine symbolism is more passive in the best of ways, in the most beautiful of ways, in the most necessary of ways. And masculine symbolism is more active, once again, in the most beautiful of ways. And that really, it's just complementary sort of things here, But I think it makes a lot of sense that when you see a king who is throned, he's actually emulating the queen. Because when you're throned and when you're seated, you're more passive, right? And so there's a reason why throughout history you see a mother nursing child and oftentimes she's sitting down. Not all the time, but oftentimes she's sitting down. And when you are sitting down, this implies domestic sort of nature. And so it's hard, as an example, to defend your family when you're seated, the role of the man. It's hard to, run your empire when you're seated. It's hard to bring home the bacon when you're seated. A woman, on the other hand, God bless her for being throned. God bless her for being at the home, taking care of the children. God bless her for being domestic and taking care of the affairs of the home and for ruling the roost, I like to say. And so to me, that is traditional gender symbolism, whether people like it or not or whatever. But that is just kind of the thing. So when I see a figure like the Hierophant or the Emperor sitting down, I just feel like there's a effeminate sort of quality to that. That once again, they're kind of revering the queen and they're actually honoring the queen. They are emulating the queen when they're doing that. So I think it's fascinating here that the roles are kind of reversed too. And you're going to see this in the Crowley deck too, this is such a tarot thing to do. But the supposed Hierophant here, who's a man, he is seated, and then the woman in between his legs, she is standing, right? So it's almost like the symbolism is kind of inverted or flipped. And again, this is all over the tarot. This is how they communicate. This is how things are kind of encoded. Um, but the other thing I will say too, by the way, so notice that instead of two pillars on the left hand side and the right hand side, you have these statues, right? And they each are holding an ankh. Well, the ankh has also been known as the Tau cross, as in Taurus, as in Tau, Taurus. So the ankh is the Tau cross. I brought this up a couple nights ago on a stream, and I needed to look into it. And sure enough, yes, the ankh was once known as the Tau cross, and might still be known as that to some people. So there is literally a Taurus connection with the ankh itself. And one of the weaves we got into on that live stream, it was on Interverse, is this idea that some pharaohs used to draw or paint, I believe paint, because I don't know if they could literally draw it, but they would paint a green ankh on their tongues to charge their message and to charge their words. And so to me, that is just really, really interesting because it fits in line with all of the other things I've been talking about regarding communication, being a bridge, and all of these other things. So anyways, I'm sure there's more to get into with this card, but that's what I have at the moment. I guess I will say that this deck creator also corresponds the Hierophant with Aries and then not Taurus. And then also, too, I've noticed a few of these cards. I haven't mentioned it yet. I should mention this. But the common Hebrew letter association for this card is Vav, but it's also sometimes Hey, which is what you see here. And so I think that's kind of an interesting sort of thing. So Hey in Hebrew, by the way, shows up twice in the four-lettered name of God, as does Vav. Vav shows up once. Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. So the Vav is in between the two Heys. So it's in between these Heys the same way Vav is in between a lot of things if it represents the world axis, if it represents this central pole or central pillar. The same way the Hierophant represents this middle way or central sort of way. So there's a lot more stuff to get into with the esoteric Hebrew stuff, but just thought I would point it out there because it's right there for you. Right. So moving on, we have the Barbara Walker deck from 1986. I've said this before, but I love Barbara Walker. She's fantastic, and her deck is really interesting. And so there's a lot of traditional symbolism here, but just kind of remixed and done in a different sort of way. The two pillars, the papal cross, the tiara, the three-tiered tiara, the hand of benediction, the two acolytes, the crossed keys, right, are right there. Very obvious. Her style is really, really simple, by the way, which is one of the reasons why I appreciate her. So she's not really going for the gold when it comes to detail and a lot of things. She's very straightforward, but her symbolism is always on point. But I'll say that one of the things that she put in here, which you guys have probably already noticed, is that on that left pillar, you see this devilish figure coming out from it. And you see that he has horns. Kind of reminds me of bull horns. And this is one of the things that I mentioned the other day, is that I have good reason to believe that the quote-unquote horns of the devil actually come from the bull, come from Baal or Moloch, or, that kind of lineage of mythology, of this dark bull that accepts sacrifices and is associated with sacrificing, first fruit children. So the firstborn children, right? The firstborn son. and that that is the appropriate sacrifice. That is the highest sacrifice for some of these bull gods or bull deities. And so I think a lot of horn symbolism, like the devil horns, when people make the devil horn hand gesture, it makes me wonder actually if the roots of that hand gesture actually come from the bull and the cow and not necessarily the goat. I think this is something that's worth kind of thinking about. So, as an example, this little devil figure, those to me look like bull horns, right? Like the classic sort of crescent bull horns, maybe perhaps a little more graphic or whatever, but that crescent moon sort of shape, right? This implies to me that there's a hidden nature to the Hierophant, as we've been talking about. There's a secretive sort of thing going on here. And so there is more going on behind the scenes. So, who is the Pope actually serving? Who is the church serving? What are they up to behind closed doors? I think you guys probably have a few ideas, right? And so this is not going to be a surprise, more than likely, to anyone watching this. But there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that, we're more than likely unaware of, right? And so this is always how it works. It's like everyone has secrets. Every organization has secrets. You're not going to know the ins and outs of what is happening within any company or group or anything like that, right? People don't even know their own secrets. People don't even know their own psychology. People are unaware of the hidden aspects of self. In fact, in order to uncover some of these hidden aspects of self, it takes a lot of work. And so people don't even know who they are. So it kind of stands to reason that, an organization or group as big as the church, the Catholic Church, is going to have a whole hell of a lot of secrets. That's just the nature of things, right? And again, as above, so below. So like the bigger the organization, the higher the tower, the higher the building, the larger the underground levels to the building or to the tower. That's just how it works, as above, so below. So it's like the bigger the thing, the more secretive and the larger the private aspect of their businesses as well. And so this to me is just like a really simple nod towards all of these different things. But it's saying that there is a sinister quality to the role of the Pope, the role of the Hierophant, and that, again, even perhaps maybe, I know I just said the word sinister and I'm saying the word devil, but this is like a necessary part to everything. There's a hidden aspect to everything. You can't have the light without the dark, and vice versa. So you can't have spring and summer without fall and winter. This is just the nature of everything. And so, but she's definitely putting a very overt sort of nod to all of this stuff right there with that figure just kind of popping out there. So anyway, so that's the main thing I think is worth bringing up. The other thing I will say is that it looks as though it's like a rosary or a necklace with a cross at the end of it. Each of those figures has, and it's just resting on the ground there. I don't know why that's kind of catching my attention right now, but I think that's kind of interesting. Just those crosses resting on the ground, and they are kneeling as well. And so anyways, something worth chewing on. I think maybe there's more than meets the eye with potentially what that means or represents, but there you go. So once again, this is the Barbara Walker deck from 1995. And then now we have one of my favorite decks. This is the Morgan Greer from 1979. And I always say this, but the Morgan Greer, I love how solid everything looks. Everything looks bold. Everything just has this very strong sort of presence to it. And the Hierophant is no different. But a lot of the classic symbolism is here. So many of the things we've already gone over. But I will say that the throat is highlighted here. So I was talking earlier about this communication thing, Taurus having a correspondence with the neck and the throat. And then you have that crescent moon sort of shape, this pendant or whatever it might be right over the throat. And in that way, it reminds me of the bull's horns, right? Or the cow's horns. There is a relationship to bull and cow symbolism and the moon. The cow jumped over what? The moon, right? And so the moon is made out of what? Cheese, so which comes from milk, which more than likely is probably milk from a cow. So there's all of this very, very interesting symbolism between the moon and between the cow or the bull. And I think it's probably worth saying too, by the way, that my understanding is that in the modern world, I can't tell you exactly when this happened, but my very strong suspicion, and I'm not alone with this, but it makes a lot of sense that Taurus was actually once acknowledged as a cow, and that there was more of a overt feminine aspect to this sign. And so once again, it corresponds or is ruled by Venus, right? Now, when we think of Taurus, we think of the bull. And so we think of this masculine sort of creature, right? This angry sort of creature. And in a lot of ways, or at least, in the modern world, we tend to see Taurus too as like this big, burly, bulky bull, right? I think that it used to be more feminine. So I think that Taurus had a more feminine quality to it. And I think whether you want to blame the patriarchy or whatever else, whether you want to blame the patriarchy or whatever else, I think at some point this cow became way more masculine. And so just thought I would throw that out there. Also, too, notice even the effeminate sort of quality to this Pope's face, to the Hierophant's face, right? This is something that we're going to see in a few other cards as well. And this is something that I pointed out in the Tower, in the Emperor card. The Emperor, when you start getting into older cards that depict the Emperor, it's very interesting to see that some of these emperors look very, very effeminate. And it's by design. It's totally intentional. And so here, this Hierophant has kind of more of a feminine sort of presence to him. Once again, Taurus is ruled by Venus, so that could be the case. But as I was saying earlier too, being throned and being seated is more of a feminine sort of dynamic, in my opinion, from what I gather. And then you see those crossed keys. So those are very, very prominent. And here you can really see that one is silver and the other is gold. And one of the things that I feel like I should just get into now, which I've made videos about, is this idea that Taurus represents the gateway to hell and Scorpio represents the gateway to heaven. And there's a very good reason why this has been kind of expanded upon by certain researchers and astrologers and things like that. This is a tradition, actually, and they're known as the silver and golden gates. And specifically, not just Taurus representing the gateway to hell, but literally the star Aldebaran, which is the eye of the bull, which is one of the 4 royal stars of astrology. And not just Scorpio being the gateway to heaven, but specifically the royal star within Scorpio, which is named Antares, which goes by the heart of the scorpion generally. And so they sit on opposite sides of each other on the ecliptic. And when you are looking at Antares, the heart of the scorpion, you are looking towards the center of the galaxy. And when you're looking at Aldebaran, you're looking away from the center of the galaxy. So you're kind of looking towards the abyss, I would say. You're looking towards the sacred center of our galaxy when you look at Scorpio and Antares specifically, and then you're looking away from it when you're looking at Taurus and Aldebaran specifically. Sometimes I get the metals mixed up, but I believe Aldebaran and Taurus is symbolic of the silver gate, and then Scorpio and Antares is symbolic of the golden gate. And so isn't it interesting that we have the Golden Gate Bridge, right, in San Francisco? And so anyway, so that is something that you can look into. I've made videos about it. If you go to my playlists and you look up Taurus, I have a video it's probably, I probably make a reference to it in the title, I think, but the silver and golden gates. And so that's where I get into it. So Taurus and Scorpio play a very, very interesting part in the symbolism of these keys here as well. So that's another way of looking at these keys as accessing that gate of hell, Aldebaran, and accessing the gate of heaven, which is Scorpio. And once again, they're on opposing sides of the ecliptic. And so when Scorpio is rising, the bull is falling, and vice versa. When the bull is rising, Scorpio is falling. That's how all of these polarity signs kind of work out. And so it's really interesting too. I've made posts about it on my Instagram, but in the Mithraic tradition known as the Tauroctony scene, Mithras is slaying the cosmic bull, and there usually is a scorpion pinching its testicles. And I find that hilarious and funny and interesting, but Scorpio corresponds with the genitals. And so that correspondence with that to me is like spot on. But it's also implying too that when the scorpion rises, the bull is falling. And so this is part of the deal. And so if I'm not mistaken, Orion as well, the great hunter, I believe he gets either stung or pinched by a scorpion. And I believe it's some of the same symbolism kind of going on as well. So it's an astrotheological sort of narrative that's playing out. So anyways, the golden and silver keys being the keys to the golden and silver gates. So definitely worth looking into. I was really interested in that whole side of things a handful of years ago, but I haven't looked into it in a while. All right, so moving forward, we have the Hermetic Tarot from 1979. And this deck is freaking loaded. There is so much stuff going on in this card, and there's a lot of stuff going on in this deck in general. It is just jam-packed with information. So, first thing that I need to point out here is the alternative hermetic title of this card, which is Magus of the Eternal Gods. And man, I mean, there is a lot to even just say about that. Magus of the Eternal Gods. And so he's a magician, right? That's partly his role. And so he understands subtle energy. He understands the laws of polarity. He understands, I would say too, just by nature of what is being said here and kind of what his role is, potentially to the Hermetic principles, I guess you can say. And he's in touch with eternal gods, right? He's in touch with things beyond our reality, right? And also, I would say that eternal gods kind of implies another classification of gods. And so, shout out to Juan from the Juan on Juan podcast. We're going to be getting into some really interesting information regarding the tunnels of Set and Kenneth Grant and some of his work with the Lovecraftian mythos. But one of the things with Lovecraft and the ancient ones, or the old ones as they're called, is that these creatures, these figures, these deities, if you want to call them that, like Cthulhu, they occupy another classification of gods that are much older than a lot of other gods. And so to me, this Magus of the Eternal Gods implies that the Hierophant, at least in this deck, because this is an esoteric deck, and there actually is Taurus symbolism relating to, you know, the things I just mentioned, the tunnels of Set and things like that. But it's implying that he's in touch with an older classification of God, and that perhaps not the gods that the public is worshiping, not the gods that normies revere, but older deities than that, you know, primordial deities, primordial gods, if you will. So that's a whole conversation that could be unpacked, but I thought that was interesting. Magus of the Eternal Gods. And so notice that he is not throned, but he is like kneeling, right? and he's not on his knees though, right? But he is squatting rather. Squatting is probably a better word. And so he is squatting, and he's making this really interesting gesture with his hands. It almost looks like he's pointing at his own eyes potentially. This is probably, by the way, when I first got this deck, I think that this is the card that really blew me away, just because it got me thinking, because I didn't quite understand what was going on. And I just thought that there was so much to look at. And just because he's squatting and he looks like he's trying to intimidate somebody, it almost looks like he's in a primal pose. It looks like he is, there's almost this like slight warrior aspect to him or something. And he's saying, hey, I have my eyes on you. That's kind of what I'm picking up, at least. I could be mistaken on that one. But nevertheless, he is squatting. You can see the head of an elephant or potentially a mammoth to the left side of him. And then you also see the an elephant's trunk, I believe, on the right-hand side, and potentially a tusk from a mammoth as well. So there's all of these elephant symbols around him as well. The Hierophant, elephant. There's a relationship there. And so we're going to see this in the Crowley deck as well, that he actually includes elephant symbolism as well in this card, which the elephant, I think it's interesting because they're so big, right? They correspond with the earth. They have those tusks, which is arguably a very earthy sort of symbol. Horns arguably are an earthy symbol as well. And so the elephant too is said to have a really good memory as well. And so if he is the keeper of secrets and of esoteric doctrines and everything else, then he himself also has a pretty good memory. And then you also have these two towers. These towers look like they're intended for communication purposes. It kind of reminds me of Antiquitech, right? If you're into that side of research and everything, it looks like there's a function behind them. It looks like there's a function. It looks like there's a purpose. But he is, once again, though, that middle tower. He is that middle pillar. He is that middle way. He is that middle opening or that middle gateway, right? The go-between or the in-between, between the polarities. And then you got that 6-pointed star above, but that star is made out of several letters as well. I see a Z, I see an A, I see an X, and I see what could potentially be an upside down omega. And then there's also some other Hebrew letters kind of thrown in there as well. But yeah, some of the classic symbolism is there. The tiara, you see the Taurus glyph down below, and you see that it's basically kind of embedded within that upside down triangle, which is the alchemical triangle for Earth itself, pointing downward, right? Drawing your eye downward toward the Earth. And then within those towers, you have a couple of other symbols. So I believe those rings on the left-hand side that are on the top of his scepter there, those are called the Borromene rings. I believe those originally came from Italy, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, it makes so much sense to have that pentacle right there on the right-hand side, right? The 5-pointed pentacle, as I've brought up many, many times this evening. And then other standard stuff, you got the Vav Hebrew letter on the upper left-hand side of the card, and then you got the V on the right-hand side of the card. So that's what I'm seeing, guys. I think there's certainly more to unpack, but let's move forward here and see what the next card is. All right, so we got the Marty Yeager deck from 1975. And this is known as the Naked Jaeger because a lot of the figures here are naked. And they're like, I don't know if he has any women in this deck. That'd be hilarious if he does not. But it's usually dudes. And so, yeah, so that's the thing. I thought it was really funny when I first came across it and the guy said, oh, yeah, people call it the Naked Jaeger. I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. There's a lot of naked dudes in here. But the symbolism to me is really, really interesting. And so I picked it up. And here we are. This is the Hierophant card, clearly. You got the two pillars, one on the left, one on the right. Two naked dude pillars, of course. And then one is lit and one is dark. Isn't that interesting? Given everything that we've been talking about, public, private, this openness versus secrecy and all of that. So that makes perfect sense with everything that we've been talking about. And then one of the bowls, right, that's holding the incense. Clearly one is lit and then the other one is not, or it's not even present. It's not even there. And then you got these two figures down below. And I just think it's really interesting too, their position and their pose. Like, what is going on there? What is being communicated here? I would love to know. As always, the last couple of times I did these tarot streams, by the way, I got emails specifically about certain cards, and I got DMs and stuff about certain cards. So feel free and reach out if you guys are really like, if you're seeing something and you see it clearly and you think I should know about it, like feel free and just touch base and let me know what you guys are seeing, because I get a lot out of those comments, honestly. And I really think that everyone kind of has a piece to the puzzle. So I'm doing my thing over here, but by no means am I claiming to have all of the answers with any of this stuff. There's a lot more decoding to be had, trust me. And obviously there's a lot of cards here too, so I don't necessarily pick up all of the little details. But yeah, so what is going on there with those two figures? Obviously each of their arms, one is supporting them on the ground, the other one is reaching towards the heavens, towards the Pope, towards the Hierophant. And then it looks like one figure here is supposed to be, a light-skinned white guy with blonde hair, and the other guy looks like he might be, a brown dude, ethnic of some sort. And so black hair, darker skin, tan skin. And so there's also that being played around with here, right? This light side on the left-hand side, and then this dark side on the right-hand side. Also the figure, the Pope, he has roses, what looks like roses all over his gown. Once again, I was talking about roses and its connection to Venus, right? And then he has that staff that he's holding in his left hand, and it's made up of Hebrew letters. And so it's interesting. My Hebrew, I mean, I'm getting better with acknowledging or just knowing the letters pretty much. But what I'm seeing here is that it's actually the four-lettered name of God, but there is an additional letter that's squeezed right in the middle. So generally it's Yod He Vav He. So if you're reading it from bottom upward, you're going to see the Yod, and then you're going to see a He. But usually you're going to see Vav He, but instead you see Shin, and then you see Vav He. So it's actually Yod He Shin Vav He. I do not know what that means, and so maybe someone can Google it, or maybe someone's already aware. But the injection of that Shin is very, very intriguing. And I do think, I mean, all of the Hebrew letters, guys, I mean, there's so much mystical stuff going on with all of it. But it makes me wonder, what the gematria is when you insert that Shin, if it means something else when you insert that Shin, of all places, why is it in the middle? I kind of have my hunches and guesses, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone here in the chat actually knows more about this than me. So I could be mistaken here, but that's what I see. Yod He Shin Vav He. Or if you're reading it from the top down, He Vav Shin He Yod. Yeah, so that's what I got for this one. Very, very interesting. And then this is a big one. This is the Thoth deck from Crowley from 1943. But, a lot of the symbolism we've kind of already covered, but there is certainly a lot more to talk about. So, I mean, actually, it really does break away from a lot of traditional Hierophant cards. You don't have the two pillars. You don't have like the clear throne. It's not the traditional Pope, by the way, either. And so, the first thing that I always notice is the color palette. And so lots of browns, lots of oranges, And so the browns certainly remind me of Earth, the soil of Earth. And then you can see all of these 5-pointed stars everywhere. Very, very appropriate given everything we've already outlined. So the main star, by the way, in the middle is being projected or emanated from that sword, which basically, it's almost like this projection coming from the womb of that figure, which I interpret this as Isis. So this is a very clear expression of Venus, in my opinion. And so Venus also, by the way, goes through cycles. And so when you see that crescent that she's holding, to me now, is it a lunar symbol or is it a Venusian symbol? It very well could be a Venusian symbol, given the fact that Taurus corresponds with Venus. I think that could very well be the case. And so the expression or the emanation, the light, the pentacle coming from her womb area, I think is very deliberate for obvious reasons. Woman is the real gateway here. This is how we are born. And so it's an expression of that, I would say. And there's also womb symbolism, like overt womb symbolism in the Rider-Waite card as well, which I'll point out when we get to it. But the pentacle, the downward pentacle, right, is coming from her. And so again, your eye, when you have an upside down pentacle and the arrow is pointing downward, it's definitely symbolic of Earth. It draws your eye downward, right? This is why the pentagram, is such a thing related to Satanism and things like that, with that point going downward. And then within that pentacle, you see that white 5-pointed star, and then you see a child within it. And so to me, this is symbolic of a trinity, mother, father, child. So the Hierophant would be a fatherly figure, patriarchal figure. She would be the feminine figure, the matriarchal figure. And then that child, obviously, is the result of the masculine and the feminine coming together. And then that star is also embedded within another larger star. And then just behind the Hierophant's head, you're going to see what looks like a 5-petaled flower as well, right? So lots of fives, lots of pentacles and pentagrams and everything else, which again is so appropriate for this card. And then above his head, you see, I believe it's nine nails. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep, 9 nails. You see 9 nails going into a serpent, or at least that's kind of the implication as well. This makes perfect sense. Vav represents nails. So he chose to put 9 nails in there, which I think is really interesting. 9, 9 is very much a generative sort of number. It corresponds with the Hermit card. There is something about the 9 that constantly returns to itself. I've brought it up before, but the number 9, no matter how many times you multiply it or divide it, the result reduces back down to 9. So 9 plus 9 is 18. 1 plus 8 is 9. You add another 9, that's 27. 2 plus 7 is 9. You add another 9, that's 36. 3 plus 6 is 9. And then it works the other way too. So 9 halved, 4.5. Half of that, 2.25. Et cetera, et cetera. No matter what, if you reduce all of the numbers down together, you add them together, the result is always 9, basically. And so 9 is very interesting. Nine nails. I'd like to learn more about that for sure. But you can see too, this also breaks tradition because you see these 4 masks in the corners, right? And so these are symbolic of the fixed signs. Taurus is a fixed sign. So in the upper left, we have the mask symbolic of an eagle. This is Scorpio. Down below, we have the bull, which is Taurus. And then to the right, we have Leo, the lion. And then above, we have a man, which is Aquarius. And so this is the fixed cross. These are the fixed signs. It's very interesting that they're using masks because, once again, I even mentioned it earlier, this whole idea of wearing masks, how you wear masks with different people in your life and in different situations. You know, if you're going to go on a date versus buying a car, you're probably going to approach things a different sort of way. Your personality might be a little different, right? Depending on who you're interacting with. This is just how things go, in my opinion. And then psychologically, we have archetypal symbols for a reason, right? We have all of these cards for a reason, so all of these cards, all of these signs, all of these symbols, they're all aspects of us. They're all aspects of our psychology, which is extraordinarily deep and nuanced. And there's just so much going on with all of it. But at the end of the day, it's like the Hierophant, is an aspect of us. This idea of a high priest or a high priestess, it speaks to part of our own innate eternal nature, I would say. But here we are. We have these masks, right? And we've been talking about secrecy. And so it implies that they hide things. They're hiding the true nature of something. They're keeping things secret from the public versus private. This is a whole entire thing here. So I just think that's really, really intriguing that they are masks without eyes. And even the Hierophant himself does not have eyes. It looks like he's supposed to maybe be a statue. And I think maybe I get that from the fact that it's an older, like, Sumerian or Babylonian statue, and this guy looks exactly like this person here. And so I'm gonna have to pull that up, and maybe I'll make a post about it or something like that. But to me, at least, the face, I get a statuesque sort of thing from the face and the beard, like the nature of the beard and how the beard is constructed. There's statues from way back when that look very, very similar in nature with how they choose to depict the beard. And then I was saying earlier too that there are elephants in this card. You can see one to the left, and then you can see one to the right. And then you can also see that basically the kind of implication that I'm getting here is that the Hierophant is literally sitting on the bull. Like, the bull is his throne. And so that to me is also interesting. And the vibe that I've always gotten from this card is that you really can't see the eyes of Isis. It's too small. And then the eyes of the Hierophant, there's no pupils. So that's a stylistic sort of choice. And then obviously there's no eyes within the masks, but the one figure that's looking directly at the viewer, that's looking directly at you, to me appears to be that bull on the left-hand side. So it's just like looking right at you. And so obviously all of the bull symbolism and Taurus symbolism, I think that's fascinating. And then also too, it's kind of intriguing that the bull that the Hierophant is sitting on is also touching the mask of the bull as well. So I don't think that's a coincidence. The other thing I'll say too is that when you look at the universe card from this deck, there is also the four faces of God, which is also known as the tetramorph, by the way. But the four animals in the corners, the bull in the universe card is the only one with swirly eyes. And so it's you have the four creatures in the corners, and they're all spewing water from like their mouths. And the bull is the only one that has spiral eyes. That to me is really, really fascinating. And so we'll have to get to that at another time. But Crowley chose to depict this Hierophant with the Borromene rings once again. So it's definitely a symbol of the Trinity, amongst other things, I would say, because there is the Vesica Pisces sort of aspect. There's like 3 Vesica Pisces in the center, and they're all interlocked. And so, again, the Trinity symbolism here, it's being expressed, I think, in a few different ways. And yeah, I think that'll do it. I kind of think potentially also that Isis with that sword, it might be a nod to the nail as well. You know, it could be a sword, but look at that handle. That handle doesn't look like it's meant to be held. And so it makes me wonder if it's somehow alluding to the nail, perhaps. Real last thing I'll say is that his gown is flowing downward and off of the canvas. And so to me, the thing that I'm picking up from that is that he is one with Earth. That to me, it's kind of symbolic of him being with the soil, or literally kind of blending into that earthy sort of aspect. And so his gown just doesn't end, but it almost kind of looks like it just flows naturally and perhaps blends into his environment, right? So it doesn't look very practical, but it looks like it's intended to be abstract to bring out that earthy sort of quality. So that is what I pick up. Also, just, you know, behind every good man is a good woman, right? So the Hierophant is much larger, but really, to me, the most potent player here is actually Isis. Got it. So we have another big one here. So this is the Rider-Waite from 1909. So there's a lot of classic symbolism here. I mean, truly, most of this stuff now we've definitely gone over, I would say. But a few of the differences here that are worth pointing out. There are what look like, a womb and fallopian tubes on the pillars there, on the left-hand side and right-hand side, which is very, very interesting. And I think that that is kind of clearly what's being acknowledged here, with that, again, alluding to feminine symbolism, the gateway that is the womb, that is woman. I pointed it out in a stream a couple days ago, but the fact that the Hierophant has this blue, it's not a scarf, but it looks like it's part of the undergown, just wrapped around his throat. And so you can see that the blue gown can be seen behind the red exterior down below, but it looks like it's just intending to highlight the throat. And so the throat symbolism is definitely being acknowledged for whatever reason here. And perhaps it is a nod to the secretive aspect of the Hierophant and his role, and the knowledge that he possesses. Being the middle way, I think it's kind of fascinating that there is that white sort of strip right in the middle of his gown as well. So it's almost highlighting the three pillars that I've been talking about: the left, right, and then that central pillar. And then also, too, the other thing is that on his tiara, his three-tiered tiara, it kind of looks like they're trying to make a W on top, right? To me, that's intriguing for a few different reasons, but I'm not sure if this is actually what's going on. If it's a W, the W has those three tips on top, and so it kind of is corresponding with this Trinity aspect again. That papal cross having the three crossbars, and then the tiara having those three tiers, and then those 3 points coming out from that tiara, I think is, I don't know. It's at least worth pointing out. I'm not sure if anyone has ever written about that. And then also, too, in the Marty Jaeger deck, right? That shin, the addition of that shin letter in Yod He Vav He right in the middle, there's 3 points to that as well, pointing upward. And it looks very much like a W. So I don't know if that's what's intended to kind of be encoded here, but just spitballing, just thought I would acknowledge that. It kind of looks funny now that I'm looking at it right now. And then, to the side of the Hierophant, on the left-hand side and right-hand side, you see those two circumpuncts, the circles with the dot. That is referred to as the Godhead, right? The circumpunct. It also looks like a target, and target, the TAR of target comes from Taurus, because the target is the target is also the bull's eye. And so bull's eye symbolism, that's actually, I'm working on a script right now for a new original video, and it's going to be about bull's eye symbolism and how the bull's eye relates to the circumpunct and the word target and all of the things, basically related to those symbols, but specifically how it relates to Taurus. And so I'm just kind of seeing that right now. Those two circumpuncts. Are those targets? Is it are those bull's eyes? I don't know. But they're definitely there for a very good reason. All right, so we're actually getting into some older decks now. So this is from 1835. This is the Soprafino deck. So yeah, the last deck was from 1909. We're skipping a handful of years here to 1835, and a lot of the symbolism we've already discussed. There's lots of beautiful details here, though, with the fabrics and the colors and just the illustration style in general. One of the things, though, that really just comes out at me immediately is this figure in the lower right-hand corner. He looks like he's up to no good. He looks like he, is he a follower? Is he an enemy? Is he a spy or something like that? It looks like he has secrets of his own, right? And then also the Pope kind of looks angry. It looks like he is not having it, or it looks like he is, I don't know. I don't know if someone, maybe disrespected him, if he is over this position, what's going on with that. But to me, between the Pope and then that guy, those are the only two figures looking in our direction, by the way. There's three other figures. There's a guy looking up towards the Hierophant, and then there's the two figures looking in his direction. And then the two figures looking towards us look like they have something up their sleeve. And so I'm very much reminded of one of the earlier cards where one of the followers has a knife behind his back. I think that this guy might be capable of something along those lines. But yeah, otherwise, a lot of what's being seen here, I think there's just lots of beautiful artistic work being done here. The craftsmanship of this deck is beautiful, but in terms of symbolism that I feel like is worth really going over, I think we've covered much of it. But certainly there is some sort of relationship going on between the Pope and then that guy in the corner. And then also notice too, Il Papa, right? And so the Pope card. And so, but Papa, Father, Jupiter, and so Pater. And so it's really interesting because in one of the cards that we're going to see here very soon, which actually, is it the next one? Hey, perfect. Instead of the card being called the Pope or the Hierophant, Il Papa, it's literally Jupiter, the king of planets, the fifth card in this deck. And so this deck is called the 1JJ Tarot, and this is from 1831. And so to me, this is why I absolutely love buying old decks, buying classic decks, and buying decks that really kind of go, off script a little bit and introduce something new that I've never seen before. And so this deck definitely does that. So instead of the fifth card being the Hierophant and being a traditional Pope-like figure, this one is just called Jupiter, but this is the corresponding card for the Hierophant. And so you see a depiction of Jupiter. You see an eagle, which he very much corresponds with. He has that wand or that scepter in his hand. Scepters are usually indicative of authority, of power, of order. A lot of the power, by the way, of the scepter and of the wand comes from the world axis. It comes from the cosmic axis. Um, Cosmic axis symbolism, by the way, is old world symbolism. That's why most people are unaware of it, because it's an old world sort of concept. It's an old world sort of idea. In the modern world, a lot of people have not looked into it. And so it's kind of this foreign sort of thing. And I'm doing what I can to kind of just talk about it because I'm learning a lot about it. I think it's interesting. I think it unlocks a lot of secrets. And if you want to learn more about it, definitely check out some of my other live streams. I would say that the Magician's Wand would be a good one to look into. If you haven't seen it, check out the Magician's Wand, because I get into wand symbolism and how it corresponds with the world axis or the cosmic axis. But the world axis or cosmic axis, generally, when it's pointed up and down, when you envision it being upward and downward vertically, that implies power. It's almost like somebody having a backbone. It's like you standing upright. So when you see a wand or a sword or an obelisk or a tower and it's pointed up and down, that really implies order. It implies stability, right? There's a reason why a lot of royal people of authority, there's a reason why they like to hold wands and like to hold scepters. And when they're holding it vertically, to me, this is the most authoritative sort of pose to have with it. Here, you can see that it's just resting on his lap and it's actually pointed downward. And so he looks bored, right? He even needs to prop himself up with his hand. He's leaning on his fist, right? And into his arm. And so he looks bored. It looks like his power has been taken away from him. It looks like his energy has been zapped for whatever reason. So he doesn't look enthusiastic. He looks like he's tired. He looks uninterested. Why? What's going on here? I think it's really interesting because this also lines up with a lot of other tarot symbolism where they kind of show you the opposing energy of what you would expect. So my classic go-to example for this is the Strength card. So the Strength card corresponds with Leo the lion. And when you think of the lion, you think of the king of the jungle. You think of this beast, right, who can hold his own. You think of this animal that all the other animals fear. Yet in the Strength card, in a lot of classic depictions of the Strength card, the lion has his tail between his legs and he looks submissive and he's being submitted by a woman who oftentimes is kind of emblematic of Virgo. And so that's one example, one very clear, easy example to understand how the tarot works, is that, yes, the Strength card corresponds with Leo, the lion, the powerful lion, but he is being shown in a very submissive pose. And so here we see Jupiter, the king of planets, and he looks just kind of like, he looks like he's watching TV, but he's bored with what's on TV or something. He's bored with what's on YouTube, And so to me, that's just kind of a fascinating reversal of symbolism. It's kind of an inversion of what you would typically expect. But he's the king of the planets, which means that he is like the head patriarchal figure of the planets, of the traditional planets, right? And so to me, there's a definite correspondence between Jupiter and especially the Emperor card, but I would say too as well, the Hierophant card. And I've read some stuff recently relating the Hierophant to Jupiter as well. So I just thought it was kind of a curious sort of thing that you would see Jupiter here, of all people. And if he's the patriarchal figure, if he's the king of the planets, that means that he's the father. Well, what do we call priests? Father, right? So the Hierophant is also a father, by title. And so anyways, so there you go. This is interesting. I like the fact that it's different from what all of the other cards depict. But as always, if you have any opinions about what's going on here, please let me know. And then now we have the Neoclassico from 1810. And so once again, Il Papa. And pretty simple stuff here. You see the hand of benediction, that blessing there. He's seated, and you see one of his followers looks like he's either bowing down or kissing his feet or something like that. The Hierophant is looking down. It kind of makes me wonder, just looking down like that, is he acknowledging the earth? And then also, is his follower, by getting down like that in that submissive pose, is there earth symbolism to be kind of deduced from that, being closer to the earth? And then Taurus being an earth sign. And then you see the classic papal cross. So very, very simple card, but it's beautiful nonetheless. I do like this deck, but I don't know if I'm seeing too much here that is worth kind of decoding. I'm kind of curious maybe if the robe that he's wearing, are those little sort of emblems there? Are they supposed to be depicting something? I'm not sure. I'm not seeing anything on my end, but maybe you guys are. And so moving forward, we have a Marseille deck from 1709. So I showed you guys the Jodorowsky version of this deck. And a lot of, the main symbols are definitely intact. It's not as detailed. It's not as clean. I really love the fact that you can buy certain decks that really keep all of the original ink and some of maybe the imperfections, intact, because I just love the aesthetic behind it. But you have the Pope here. You got all of the traditional symbols. One thing I'll point out is the fact that, one of the figures, his hand is going towards the Pope. It's above. It almost looks like it wants to receive something from the Pope. And then the other figure, its hand is downward, like it, I don't know. There's as above, so below kind of thing going on with that, right? And then it looks as though the figure on the left, I kind of noticed this earlier, but kind of looks like he has maybe a hat or something that's hanging off of him. I don't know if that is what that yellow sort of circular thing is supposed to imply, but that's kind of what I'm picking up from it. I also think it's interesting too that they are looking up to him, and clearly they have respect for him, and he is looking like off into the distance. He's not looking in their direction. He's looking probably towards the masses or the congregation or something like that. He's looking off, away from them. So I think that's kind of an interesting sort of triangulation. They're so close to him, they're kneeling or they're on the ground looking up to him, idolizing him in a way, wanting his attention, and he's not really giving it. So I think that's kind of an interesting detail, just in general. So that is the Marseille. And then now we have what's referred to, and I'm going to call it this because if you want to Google it, this is what you need to Google to find it. But it is called the Engravings Sec Roman numeral 18 18th century. I know it doesn't really roll off the tongue. Engravings Sec 18th century. And so because for a while, I think I was trying to look for it online and I'm like, I can't really find it. And it's because I was typing it in wrong. And so you have to be kind of specific with this one if you want to pick it up, at least through the search engines. But a very different pope, right? And to me, I see a lot of mercurial symbolism with this pope. And I see it in the staff, right? And I see it with the staff with the serpent. To me, whenever I see that staff, whenever I see the serpent, I immediately just think of the world axis, the cosmic axis. I think of Kundalini energy going up the spine. The spine is the correspondence for the world axis. I think of the serpent and the tree in the Garden of Eden. And then with that rooster there, that cock, I think of phallic symbolism. It crows with the morning sun, right? And it's the phallic symbolism corresponds with Mercury in so many different ways. I've made videos about this as well if you want to learn more about it. So it's implied that he is traveling as well, which is a very mercurial thing to do. If I'm not mistaken, I think there's a lot of Moses sort of symbolism going on here as well. He's holding a chalice, which I think is kind of intriguing because we have not seen anything like that beforehand. Obviously, this depiction of the Hierophant completely breaks the mold from everything else that we've seen so far. But I get this mercurial traveler, and I've been thinking about, or I've been talking about Mercury being a traveler, also being a mediator, being on this bridge between the different planes via the world axis, by the way. And so that cup too kind of reminds me of, even just look at kind of how it's illustrated ever so slightly. It reminds me of the crescent moon, or it reminds me of the horns of the bull as well. So there's a receptive nature to this cup, and I don't think it's full. To me, it looks like it needs to get filled, and it's really interesting. But there is a connection to poverty and poverty symbolism with the empty vessel, and so the empty bowl or the empty cup implies poverty. And so to me, this figure doesn't look rich, right? He looks like he's a poor traveler. And so to me, it looks like he wants his cup to be filled. Does he want it to be filled with money? Does he want it to be filled with wine? Does he want it to be filled with knowledge or wisdom? What's he looking for? But it's kind of it's an interesting sort of tangent that I've read about before, where there are, as an example, there are priests, essentially. They're known as Babas, holy men. There's holy men in India, and there's different sects of holy men. And so there's lots of different branches and schools of thought and philosophies in India with these Babas, right? And so there are some groups that basically live a life of devotion by being committed to meditation and being committed to their studies, and by living a life of isolation, basically. In a way, this reminds me of the Hermit card, and you could see how this card is kind of hermetic in nature, right? And the Hermit card literally corresponds with Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. And so when you see the Hermit, you're seeing a mercurial figure. You're also seeing a shepherd, and what I think you're seeing is you're seeing kind of like an alternate timeline of Christ if he never died, and if he stayed a shepherd, and if he basically lived a hermetic sort of lifestyle. And so I see the hermit in this figure. I also see Christ as the good shepherd in this figure. I see Mercury, but I also see someone who is living this isolated life, who maybe has devoted himself to living a very, very simple life. But one of the things I was going to say is that some of these Babas or holy men in India, at least this one group in particular, literally they live an entire life with like two belongings or something. It's a bowl, and I can't even remember the other thing, but one of the things was a bowl. And so that is like basically all they have. If I'm not mistaken, it might literally be like a bowl and like their clothes, and that's it. And so the tradition is that they live with this bowl, and they just have a relationship with their creator, and they basically know that the community is going to take care of them. And so that's what this bowl represents. This bowl is used for water, it's used for food, it's used for all sorts of things. But one of the things it's used for is that people give them donations. And so this bowl is symbolic of being receptive to the abundance around you, having faith that God is on your side, or the gods are on your side, and that they're going to take care of you. So there's a whole tradition here, again, with the empty vessel being a tool or symbol of this devotional sort of lifestyle of saying, hey, I'm living this life to get closer to God, and I'm living this inner journey, just like the hermit who lives oftentimes in isolation, in a cave or something like that. And so this bowl or this chalice is here to receive gifts from the people who understand the work that I'm doing, which is important. And so I think that's a really, really interesting thing. And I didn't even think about that until right now, but that's kind of what I'm picking up. So again, lots of mercurial symbolism in the mix here. And I feel like this is a good time too, by the way, because I'm not checking the chat. I'm not really seeing what's going on besides what's happening on my screen. But if you're getting something out of this presentation and you would like to donate to the work that I'm doing, I encourage you to either leave a super chat or to sign up for Patreon. If you don't want to do either of those things, I totally understand. You can like, subscribe, etc. But you could also just send a donation. I have my information down below. And so I totally get if you guys don't want to do anything via YouTube or Patreon or want to sign up for any of that stuff. But there are other ways to support the channel for sure. So once again, that is from the 18th century. So now a lot of the cards, there aren't really specific dates to some of these decks because they're just so old. The next one here, it does say that it's from 1850, but beyond that, it gets way more vague. So this is the Tarot de Jacques Viville from 1850. And the artwork sometimes in this deck just cracks me up. It's just, I don't know, there's something to be desired. But I also love it. I kind of love how loose the artwork is. And, it looks like, I don't know, it kind of looks like a child drew it or something like that. But some of the symbolism in this deck is really, really fascinating, which is why I purchased it. And so a lot of the symbolism is the same, two figures down below. It does look like they do have hats, right, around their neck that are hanging on their back. That's interesting. And then you can see their hands are kind of gesturing towards the Hierophant. And then you see the Hierophant has his hand of benediction. He's not holding a papal cross, but he's holding a staff, which has this really interesting, tip to it. It kind of looks like, I don't even know, it looks like filigree or something like that. It kind of looks like feathers. I'm not really sure what's being implied there. Once again, these two figures are looking up to the Hierophant and he's looking elsewhere. He's looking off into the distance. And then you've got these two, I don't even know if I want to call them pillars, but they kind of are pillars, but they're made of like men, or it looks like they're babies or something. Very, very strange. So anyways, you could see that most of the classic symbolism is basically intact, but it's just a different way of looking at everything. So I'm not sure if I'm picking up too much here that I need to expand on. So with that said, this is the Mantegna deck from the 15th century, and this is the 10th card of this series. So this deck is awesome. It's like an extended major arcana deck. I think there's maybe something like 40 something or 50 something cards. It's a pretty large deck as well. But this is the 10th card, not the 5th. But I think it's interesting that it being the 10th, it's double of 5, right? So it's still an interval of 5. I have a book that's actually specifically about decoding this deck. And even the book mentioned how feminine this Hierophant looked, and that it's supposed to be a man, but its face looks like a female. And so I think that's very interesting. And she also, she has like this furrowed brow sort of thing going on as well. But this is a bit different from what we're used to seeing. So you see the Hierophant, the classic three-tiered tiara crown. You see this Vesica Pisces symbol right in the Hierophant's chest, a very, very feminine symbol, symbolic of the yoni, the vagina, right? And so the feminine qualities are really starting to come out now, I would say. And then instead of two crossed keys I almost want to say she. I keep on wanting to say she's holding the keys or she has a Vesica Pisces, but this is supposed to be a man. He's holding the keys in his right hand, and it is a man too. I mean, it says Papa right there, right down below. And we know the tradition behind this card clearly. But if you didn't know any better, I could see why somebody would think that it's clearly a woman, a high priestess, perhaps. But he is holding the keys, rather large keys as well. And my understanding from reading the entry about this deck, and specifically this card today, is that these keys are very specific. So even like the church, the Vatican, right? Their emblem has these crossed keys. And so I know there's other traditions associated with these keys. There's a lot of other things going on with these keys, but she's holding those keys. He's holding those keys, but they're not crossed. But I believe that the design of those keys specifically are very, very intentional. So I need to do more follow-up research with that. And then according at least to this book, those are supposed to be dogs. So those are dogs on the throne or on the chair of the Pope. And so 4 dogs. And it also acknowledged in the entry that the dogs on the left have like scarves around their neck. And we've been talking about neck symbolism and throat symbolism, communication, etc. And the dogs on the right do not have those scarves around their neck. I think that's very, very interesting. To me, when I first saw those animals, I potentially wondered if it was a different creature. Sometimes this deck uses what are called airmans, I believe, Ermine, and they kind of look like weasels. They might actually be from the same family. I wondered if that's what these were. I don't know the other card right off the top of my head that has those animals, but these apparently are dogs. And it looks like, at least on the left-hand side, you can really see it, that its mouth is open. And so it potentially could be barking, right? And so, again, kind of related to this communication sort of thing. And then you see a holy book, presumably something related to the Bible, one of the books of the Bible, on his lap there on the left-hand side. And then you can see that the cover of the book has, or at least the back cover, has those 5 sort of divots, or 5, they kind of look like buttons or something like that, on the book itself. It just makes me wonder if this is alluding to 5, right? The Hierophant being the traditional 5th card of the major arcana. So I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing with that one as well. But just thought I would throw that out there. But whenever you see kind of like 4 animals, whenever you see 4 pillars, a lot of times the number 4 is symbolic of foundations. It's symbolic of the earth itself. Think of the 4 corners of the earth. And so with this figure sitting amongst the 4, therefore that figure would be like the middle point, or would be the 5th figure. So as an example, like there's illustrations and paintings and things like that. Like I think of Abraxas. Abraxas is generally pulled by 4 horses. Those 4 horses represent the 4 directions, the 4 corners, the 4 elements, and then Abraxas himself represents the 5th element. So potentially that could be being acknowledged here. The Hierophant, El Papa, Papa the Pope, being the 5th sort of figure, the 5th element, something along those lines, perhaps. But the yoni too, the yoni on the chest implies gateway symbolism. And so that's what the middle pillar also represents, a gateway. And that's what this bridge, being a bridge builder, bridge and gateway symbolism, there's a lot of overlapping themes between the two. Nice. So now we have the second to last card. This is the Visconti Sforza from the 15th century. The original version of this card from this deck is gold foiled, and so I always feel like I want to point that out. Is that the brown that you're seeing when you look at this card physically in real life, and this is just obviously a reproduction, but what you're going to see is this gold foil. But here, It's basically just brown. But lots of, it's pretty simple. It's really basic. Um, you see the Pope figure with his tiara, the hand of benediction, his cloak. It looks like he does have a staff that he's actually kind of leaning on, or that his hand or arm is at least leaning on. And so he's not looking directly at us, but kind of over our right shoulder, I would say. And, there's not too much more to decode here. I love this deck just because it's so old and it's just interesting to look at. But, symbolically, there could be a lot of other things going on here that I'm not picking up. But generally, I think it's pretty straightforward, as far as I'm concerned. You can almost talk more about what's not there. You don't have the followers. You don't have the pillars necessarily. You don't have the papal cross. His outfit is very flowy and cloth-like. There is this opening in the middle. That's kind of interesting. The fact that his arms, come out from his cloak and kind of just opens him up in the middle. There is kind of perhaps this yoni vaginal sort of thing going on with all of that. It kind of implies this hidden and exposed sort of aspect, this public versus private sort of thing. Most of him is concealed, but the middle part of his body is kind of exposed. But even then, obviously he's wearing something underneath. And so that's kind of interesting. It does appear like he is wearing gloves. So again, this concealed sort of thing. So really the only part of him that's really exposed is his head, and then not even the top of his head because he's wearing that crown. And so those are a few of the things that I'm kind of picking up. It looks like he's on some platform of some sort. If I had to guess, my guess would be that that's probably an 8-sided platform as well. And so perhaps there's things to kind of deduce from that. There may be other cards, though, that use a similar sort of platform. But yeah, the fact that there's really no background to speak of either, there's just kind of less to discuss, in my opinion. But that is the Visconti Sforza. So I love this deck regardless, but there it is. And then we have the Solabusca. And so the Solabusca is a really fascinating deck. There's actually a couple of cards that I think that could potentially correspond with the Hierophant. This is the 7th card, actually. So the Solabusca has a really fascinating, interesting history. And a lot of modern decks, especially the Rider-Waite deck, really took a lot of inspiration from this deck. If I didn't say this already, it's from the 15th century. The last 3 decks that I have, by the way, I'm actually not aware of what the oldest deck is. So I don't know if you can actually get information about which one is truly the oldest. And so a lot of the traditions that modern people are aware of with the tarot, what cards correspond with what signs and things like that, everything's kind of thrown off a little bit. But the whole this deck is really interesting because the whole minor arcana is completely illustrated like a normal scene, like we're used to seeing, like in the Rider-Waite. And so that tradition was broken for many years, for centuries, literally. And so you would see for the 3 of swords or whatever, you would just see 3 illustrated swords or implied swords versus actually having like a scene or whatever. But this deck actually had illustrated scenes and artwork associated with each of the cards, which encoded the meaning behind the card instead of just having 3 sword-like looking things. But anyway, so this is one of the cards that I think potentially corresponds with Taurus and the Hierophant. It's the 7th one. It's called Dio Toro. So Dio Toro, you see the Toro right there, Taurus right there, the TAU for Taurus. Clearly it's a figure riding a chariot. And so I also think that there's good reason to think that it could potentially better correspond with the Chariot card, which is literally the 7th card of the Major Arcana. But the fact that it's Dio Toro and other people have brought this to light as being potentially related to Taurus, I thought was worth bringing up. So no doubt that name has some sort of correspondence with the bull. And so I just thought I would throw this out there for a few reasons. He's also holding a staff. Clearly, it's not the papal cross. He's throned just like the Hierophant. And yeah, the other card, though, that I think could potentially correspond with the Hierophant. And I just might add that there are certain correspondences that just don't work with this deck. They just don't work with this major arcana. So these are two of my guesses. So I don't think that I have like a dead ringer here of the correct correspondence. But this card, Apeo, I think could potentially be the card for the Hierophant because it's clearly a priest, perhaps a high priest, a holy man. And he looks like he's revering this angel. And this angel head is on top of, this tree, which arguably could correspond with the world axis or the cosmic axis. And so he's revering this angel and he has those wings, right? And so this implies to me that he, on one hand, is a holy man. On one hand, it looks like he is devoted to God, but what God? On one hand, it looks like he potentially is of the light, but then it kind of looks like he could be of the dark. Is he from the left-hand path or from the right-hand path? I think it's kind of ambiguous. I think that potentially it's kind of alluding to some of the Hierophant symbolism of, this lightness versus darkness, this public versus private. What God are you actually worshiping or acknowledging? Is this person to be trusted or not, right? Even one of his feet is exposed and the other one is hidden, is not to be seen. And so one side of his face can be seen, but the other side cannot be seen. And so if I had to just kind of pick one, I would say that this one might be a better correspondence. So here you can see that it's the 27th card of its major arcana. Off the top of my head, I can't remember or recall how many major arcana cards they have in the deck, but again, it's very, very different from a lot of the other decks that I have. And this deck is very, very malefic. Some of the artwork is particularly dark. And the history is that some people believe, or it's understood, that a royal family from Italy commissioned this deck to be made literally for the purposes of black magic. And each of the figures corresponds with a real historical figure. And so when I see this person here, and he is looking towards this angel on top of this tree, this barren tree in this barren environment. First off, I associate tree symbolism and that trunk going from earth to the heavens with the cosmic axis or world axis. And then that angel on top of that tree. Yes, it's an angel. It looks like it's supposed to be like kind of like a cherub without a body or something. But what I think of is this angel actually symbolic of an angle. So there's this whole entire idea that when you're talking about angels, you're talking about angles. And so this is related to the compass in Freemasonry that creates angles and creates circles, and the compass relates to the heavens, right? It's more it's a tool used to create circles, which opposes the square, which is used to create right angles and straight lines. So, which is more so related to Earth. And so it just makes me wonder if this angel is actually symbolic of an angle or angles, and that this tree that it rests on top of, if it's not symbolic of the center of, say, a wheel, as an example, like the wheel of heaven. And so from the center of the wheel, you get spokes emanating from that central axis, which creates angles, right? And so there's a lot of stuff to potentially be kind of pulled out from this card. But that's just one of my initial sort of hunches. So hopefully you guys could, follow along with that. But that is definitely a thread. Angels being symbolic of angles, and the angles are basically how we create shapes. And there's a lot to be said regarding the nature of certain angles. and their properties, the 45-degree angle, what can be deduced from that versus the 15-degree angle or whatever. And so there's a lot of potential sacred geometry sort of aspects baked into this card. And as I said earlier, one of the potential secrets that the Hierophant has is the knowledge of sacred geometry, is the knowledge of some of these angles, or quote, angels. So yeah, that's what I have, guys. Cool. I think that's going to do it. Yep, that's the last card. So I'm going to roll through some of these credits here. And thank you so much. If you've been hanging out this whole time, that's awesome. You're amazing. And then after I get through some of these credits, I'm going to check the chat and hang for a few minutes. And if you guys have any specific questions or anything like that, I would be happy to address them for a little while. So, wow, 2 hours, 44 minutes. That's pretty good. As I was saying earlier, if you want to, and here I am, by the way, hello. If you want to support the channel, there's a number of ways you can do so. You can like, share, subscribe, send it to a friend. Honestly, anything and everything is absolutely appreciated. So thank you so much if you're already doing that stuff. Also, clearly you can leave a super chat, or you can sign up for my Patreon. So patreon.com/symbolicstudies is where you can do that. I have 3 tiers. And, if you are a patron, I shout you out whenever I do a presentation, and you have pretty much a direct line to me. So you can always message me on Patreon. And my patrons definitely get priority when it comes to questions and things like that. Also, Symbolic Studios. If you're unaware, I've been a graphic designer for 20 years, and I've designed so many different things over these 2 decades. So I've done album covers and t-shirts and posters and websites and logos and all sorts of stuff. So I'm available for design work is what I'm trying to say. So here I have logos, sigils, and then I say digital and print. So I offer digital services and print services as well, meaning I can design things for you that exist in the digital world. So social media, things like that. Again, websites, what have you. I've designed apps before as well. So, once you really get used to the Adobe suite, Photoshop, Illustrator, things like that, I mean, it's really amazing the different things that you're going to find yourself creating over time. And so I've designed things that I've never realized I would ever design, skate decks and things like that too. So if you are a digital creator or business, I'm sure I can help you out in some way, shape, or form. Also, if you're a business that has physical products and you have packaging, you have labels, things like that, I've done all of that stuff many, many, many times over the years. It is certainly my bread and butter. It's how I got really interested in symbolism. And so if you want a designer who is maybe more symbolically literate than the average, hit me up. And if we're a good fit, we're a good fit. I would love to hear from you. It's been really cool actually to get work from my audience, and people who like what I'm putting out there, because it is just such a breath of fresh air to be myself. And that's really all I want. I want to work with people where I can actually just be myself. For a very, very long time, I worked with a lot of clients where I was very tight-lipped about so many things because I just didn't want to offend anybody, and I went along to get along, but I'm really glad I'm starting to advertise all this stuff here because the quality of client that I'm getting is much higher. Their symbolic literacy is much higher, and the projects are actually more interesting. So to me, it's just like a win-win-win on so many different levels. And, this is just a really quick example of some of my design work, some of my artistic abilities. So this is actually my illustration for my Taurus print. And so I have these Taurus prints available. I created 100 of these. And so once these are gone, there aren't going to be any made that are quite like these. These are silk screened by hand, not even by a machine. I hired a screen printer. I used to own a screen printing shop for a number of years. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that actually. But in California, I ran a screen printing shop because I had clients that wanted my design screen printed on hoodies and shirts and stuff like that. And then I also had another business at the time where we needed that kind of merch. And so I started a screen printing shop. And so I got really familiar with the process. I really love silk screening. I think it's such a cool medium for so many different reasons. And so I have 100 of these prints. My Taurus print, you can see a lot of the symbolism that we kind of talked about. The pentacle, pentagram, the Taurus field is behind this woman's head. The horns of the bull, you can see the cross keys down below. One of my intentions behind creating these prints is that I wanted to encode as much information about the sign in one illustration so that if you're really interested in the symbolism of astrology, you can literally look at this illustration and pull a lot of really juicy, good information from it. So as an example, she's breastfeeding. There's this whole entire weave with mother's milk and then the milk of the cow and the Milky Way galaxy, right? And so there's just a lot to get into within all of these prints. I only have a few available right now, but my goal is actually to complete a whole entire series. As you guys support the channel and as people buy these prints, that is just more fuel for my fire to get these things printed and out there and everything else. But each of these prints comes signed by hand by me. I ship them out myself. I package them myself. They all come with a symbolic breakdown sheet that literally decodes the symbolism behind the print. They all come with a bookmark, which is a little correspondence sheet in and of itself. It's kind of fun. And then they all come with an elemental study packet as well. And so these elemental study packets, let's see if I have one here. I think I do. Here we go. These elemental study packets, I have 4 pages, one for each element, and it really just gets into the symbolism of each element, the different correspondences. You know, I have a lot of fun things here, like the platonic solid for each element, the elemental for each element, different creatures and keywords, plants, gemstones and metals, mythology, things like that. The mathematical function that corresponds with each element as well. And so there's a few different ways of getting these study packets. You can order a print. You can sign up for my Patreon. Every single Patreon member, regardless of the tier, receives an elemental study packet, a PDF of it. Or you can simply just send me a donation. So all donations, if you include your email address, I send you an elemental study packet. Or if you get a reading and you want one, just let me know and I can send you one. No problem. And so all prints get a physical elemental study packet is what I'm trying to say. But as I just mentioned too, I'm available for tarot readings and private lessons, basically. I used to call them study sessions, but I'm using private lessons right now. It's kind of a little more straightforward, I would say, but tarot readings, I love doing them. They've been really, really potent as of late. We do it online, so we find a time to connect online, and we do a video chat. And usually readings last between 30 to 45 minutes. If you're interested, you can text me at 503-893-4606. My private lessons, they've gone all over the place in like the most amazing ways, honestly. People have wanted private tarot lessons. People have wanted book recommendations. People have just wanted to talk about symbolism. Because something I said in one of my videos resonated with them and they wanted more information or they had insights that they wanted to get off their chest. Very recently, somebody booked a session and they want me to decode a Freemasonic tracing board for them because they bought it and they're putting it up in their house, I believe. And they just want to know what the symbolism is. So they just asked me, hey, are you interested in doing a study session, a private lesson, where you just go through the symbolism of this Freemasonic tracing board? And actually, funny enough, I was already familiar with that specific tracing board because I had used it in videos and live streams and stuff like that. So of course, I'm like, hell yeah, man, that sounds fun. So let's do it. So, I've also done consultations for people, people who have wanted feedback on their business, logo, or whatever. If you think I can help you out with your symbolic needs, just reach out. Also, snail mail. I have a P.O. box, and it is P.O. Box 930, Carson, Washington, 98610. So if you want to send me a letter or a postcard or anything like that, feel free. Lastly, I will say that my girlfriend has a really cool podcast, and it's called The Healing Home, and you can find it here on YouTube at Michelle's Healing Home. And she interviews people every Tuesday. She goes live at 4 p.m. When you support her, you support me. When you support me, you're supporting her. And she's done a great job with what she's up to over there. She's an herbalist, and she's really interested in kind of kitchen witchery. And she likes folk magic and folk herbalism, folk remedies, things like that. And I will say that over the last few weeks, she's had some particularly excellent guests. So she gets into gardening and electroculture with this guy named Matt Roski. She talked about, the nature of personal responsibility with Beth Martins. And anyways, she's had some excellent guests on. So definitely check that out at Michelle's Healing Home here on YouTube. We also have a live podcast together that we do every single Thursday on her channel called Last Thursday. So we did one last night. I talked about all sorts of crazy stuff. I really feel like it's a way for me just to be a little more casual, talk about some random things that are running through my mind. If I'm reading a book, sometimes I will talk about, what I'm currently reading. I talked about the Typhonian tradition last night, the tunnels of Set. I talked about, it's referred to as the rites of the mummy. So a lot of occult history is kind of what I got into last night. And so anyway, so sometimes I like talking about some of that information on her channel just because it's a different sort of vibe. It's more casual. We usually have something special to drink. She chooses a topic, I choose a topic, and then we roll a die to see who talks first, and then we just kind of go for it. And we really interact with the chat as well. And so that's kind of another thing that's really fun. And so if you're interested, I have a link to her channel in the description. So it's a good time. You guys might like it. And for everything else, you can check out symbolicstudies.com. And so, information about booking a reading, my study packets, how to grab one, my Patreon link, all of that stuff is down below, but there's even more stuff on my website if you guys are interested. So with that said, here I am. Full screen. So let me see what's going on in the chat. This is easily, I think, the longest I've gone so far. And then also, I think the most comments I've ever gotten on a live stream. So thank you guys so much. I think we're almost at 800 comments. Let's see who is here and who is hanging out. And I want to give shout outs to people. And my internet is super slow. So I just clicked comments and I see that there's some people here, but the comments aren't loading yet. So I see that Slick is here. What's up, dude? Love Slick Dissident. Love what he's doing. I always appreciate hearing his feedback and seeing what he's been up to. There he is. And then my Cherie is here. Always nice to see you. You are awesome. Elvis is here. What's going on, dude? Weinstein's mom is here. You guys are going to have to forgive me. I'm trying to highlight comments, but my connection is super, super slow. But there he is. Slick Dissident. Elvis. And then let's see who else is hanging out here. Bird Dog, the Crypto Ronin. What's up, dude? Been on his show before. It was a good time. Erica M is here. What's going on? See, I'm clicking these comments, man, and they're taking forever to show up. Let's see who else. Thor Galore, thank you so much. Astrotheology is here. Zerta, King of Cops, what's up, dude? Chris, he's awesome. He has a really cool show. Was on that, talked about Lovecraftian movies. God, I say this every single time. Some of these comments are awesome. I really need to go through some of my live streams and just read the comments seriously, because I'm just cruising through this and you guys have some brilliant feedback. Carlos is here. What's going on? Josue is here. Hello, hello. And who else? Who else? All right. Looks like some of the same names have been hanging out and been particularly active in the chat over the last, I don't know how long, maybe hour or something like that. But anyways, you guys are much appreciated. So much love, much respect. Hey there, Lisa. Nice to see you. And we will do this again, guys. Like I said, I'm working on a script right now for bullseye symbolism and how that relates to the Torget, and then how it relates to the centaur. Centaur means bull killer. So the bullseye, the circumpunct, the concept of a centaur or centaur. There's so much going on with all of that that I really, really want to create a edited video that really dives into some of that. I'm going to wait till we're at 3 hours. So we're almost at 3 hours right now. And so I'm just going to wait for a few more seconds to hit that 3 hour mark. And I'm sure we crossed the 800 comment mark as well. So anyways, much love. I will talk to you guys soon. And yeah, you guys have a good weekend. Take care. Until next time.